All right, let me hop into the wolf den. Anyway, glad to be here. Thanks for getting us all together.
Yeah,
Hello,
man.
everybody.
Hello. Okay,
So
so
for
we
those,
now know that LCTRfan is not Rob's wife. We know that for sure. So we've got.
I don't know what
It's
that
true.
joke
I know-
is.
Well, someone was trying to crash the Discord, saying that they were Rob's wife.
yeah,
Huh.
yeah, that was before you got
It's
here.
not my wife.
I was hoping it was you, but now we know it's not. So
Hey, Rob, if you're not using Discord for anything, you can turn your camera off in Discord. Might help a little bit with your bandwidth.
Oh yeah. Great point. Okay.
But yeah, I just like, I don't know that much about the three of you, and even Endernax too, other than just like what politics are. I really just am trying to get to know people. I like arguing politics, and that stuff is always fun. But I'm trying to get to know people. You know what I mean? So, like, how did you come to being a conservative? You know, like, what's your background? And I guess I'll kind of start off like this, right? So, my dad was in the Army, so I started off kindergarten through third grade down in an elementary school in Hinesville, Georgia, around Fort Stewart, right? And then when my dad got out of the Army, we moved back to where I was born in the mountains of North Carolina. From sixth grade until I graduated, I was in band. Eighth grade until I graduated was in marching band, right? So I played concert, drums, timpanis, xylophones, you know, like all your different kinds, right? Marched with fucking snare drums, bass drums, tenors, you know, did all that shit. When I graduated, got to play in some pretty big arenas too. That was a lot of fun. But when I graduated, went into the Navy, July 2001, graduated boot camp September 13th, 2001. Got out of the Navy in September of 2010. And then I started driving trucks. First, I was hauling refrigerated freight, and then I started hauling cars. So those ones that you see that's got like 9, 10 cars on the truck, that's what I did. Did that for a while. I worked maintenance jobs and air conditioning and plumbing and all that kind of stuff. And along the way, I've just always loved history and always been doing a lot of study of history on my own. And because I've kind of kept to myself over the years, and I'm finding now is probably a great time after I've had to come to the realization in this last year that I have PTSD, and I've been getting help with the VA for that. So me reaching out and talking to other people and trying to build a community here, right, is really therapeutic for me. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. But I just wanted to get the opportunity to get to know you guys, because I like all of you, and I definitely defend y'all on these panels. You know what I mean? So.
always
Yeah, I
appreciate
don't. You don't feel the necessity to defend me. That's fine. I know how it is on these panels and kind of the ad homs and things like that. So it don't get me down. Yeah, I mean, I guess my background is I grew up in rural Pennsylvania. I basically lived in a 30-mile radius my entire life. My family was broke, but we had enough to, get by. I didn't miss many meals, as people could see. I I have two brothers and a sister. My sister's the youngest. She's 20 years younger than me. So I just had a kid January 9th. I kind of got to be a grandpa first, because the idea of being a
Wait, you said
grandparent
she's
is
20 years younger than you?
yes, yeah. So like, being a grandparent, you get to do all the fun stuff with the kid. They're like, yep, back parents. That's how I was an older brother. Like, so I'm 20 years older than my sister, so it's like, hey, we go out and have fun. Oh, now you have something that's a pain. Yep, go back to mom and dad. So kind of maybe prepared me. It spoiled me from now being a parent, where it's like, oh yeah, you don't get to just you get all the unfun stuff too. But now I'm really happy to be a new dad. Politics wise,
Yeah, congrats,
I didn't
by the
care
way.
about
That's so
politics
awesome,
at all.
man.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's the happiest moment of my life. Really puts the politics stuff in perspective, because I think the country, like in many ways, it's going in a direction that's horrible. But at the same time, I'm happier than I've ever been. So it's a weird feeling. I was never interested in politics growing up. I played football. I wrestled for a while. I was on the chess club. I did show choir. I just did everything in high school, and then I got into college and I took a debate class. I liked it. I to do real estate, and after 4 or 5 years, I got really good at that and national debate tournament, which is basically like the NCAA basketball tournament. The top 72 teams in the country go, but each school is allowed to send 3 teams. So I do believe I was part of the first ever state school, at least in Pennsylvania, to make it to that tournament. And I started to despise what the debate community was while I was there. It is the left. I mean, it was in 2004 to the community. It was stuff we're just now seeing. Right? Reject whiteness. That was at least once a tournament. You'd walk into a round. You're white. You should forfeit. You don't deserve to live. You should, forfeit this round to show solidarity with people of color. You're a man. You don't deserve to live. You should forfeit to show solidarity, et cetera, et cetera. I would have considered myself at the time moderately conservative just because I was basically apolitical. And that made me an extreme lunatic on the right for that community. So what I tried to do my best was to try to reach out to people like that and to show that the people I love that I came from, that, many of which barely graduated high school, they're mechanics, they're bartenders, they're carpenters, they're welders, that those people matter and that they're a big part of this country and they're the people I respect most and that they deserve to have a voice too. And so that's basically why I started my channel, because I just feel that I don't begrudge people, whether you be Black Lives Matter, whether you be in an LGBT advocacy group. I don't have a problem with that. Like, people are going to advocate for where they think voices are needed. I don't see the voices for rural America. I don't see it. I don't see it in the entertainment industry. I don't see it in the media. I don't see it in academia. It's nowhere. And in fact, not only is it nowhere, it's the opposite. They're disparaged. These people are treated like crap. Rick Wilson of the Lincoln Project, he used to be on CNN all the time. He called people in my area of life 10-tooth rubes that wanted to stop the brown horde from coming into the country, that weren't capable of reading a map. And this stuff gets laughs on CNN. It's not funny. It's garbage. And I'm tired of kind of this disparaging attitude from the people that I think are some of the greatest people in this country, people that are living off 10, 11 bucks an hour, and they're not complaining. They just want the government of their life. And yet constantly they're infringed upon. They're treated like garbage. So that's where I come from. I also like joking around and stuff. I feel that I do have a tendency to get combative, but I don't look at it that way. I like arguing. That's why I joined debate. So I don't have a problem until it breaks down to ad hom attacks. But yeah, in general, that's what I do. And I think that I try to have a populist message. I would call myself a conservative populist. That I think that this system's so corrupt that until we end the corruption, the actual issues that we're discussing, like, for example, like the Supreme Court business, how many conservatives did I talk to that were like, if we just get, 3 justices, everything will start to get better. And look what happens to it. Where was Barrett and Kavanaugh? I don't know. So that's what I try to. We need to change this system, and that's
let me
kind of
ask
what
you this. Let me ask you this, and then I want to just kick it down to LCTRfan. And this goes to everybody, right? What if there was no, like, say, guidelines, federal guidelines for anything, and that if corporations wanted to, like, if businesses were going to grow to the sizes of corporations, that they would have to be in compliance with each state's laws in order to be able to do business there. That would cause a natural retraction as far as the power of corporations, because then they couldn't just say, oh, well, I'm federally good, I don't have to worry about some of this other stuff. I don't know. Is that just kind of like way too out there? Or can you kind of see what I'm saying?
Corporations, you can have small corporations. A corporation can be big or small. And corporations are regulated at the state level. They're created by state statute. And so there's something called like the Model Corporation Act or the Model Business Act. There's model acts that, the Conference of State Legislatures put out, and then all these state legislatures pass these model acts that, so basically, even though they're state law, most states have very, very similar same law. But, there's if one of the enforcement tools that the government has against corporations is dissolution. And so if a corporation does something that's illegal and does it bad enough, they can be dissolved by the government. The government can dissolve a corporation if they, violate laws enough. So there,
and that's exactly what I was. I would say, to me, I think that there's this demonization of corporate. Look, I certainly have a lot of problems with corporate influence in our system of governance. Unelected bureaucrats, wealthy people that are really the people that are running the show. However, that doesn't mean everyone involved in a corporation is bad. Corporations have done very good things as well. The problem is we don't enforce the laws that are already on. It's very similar to the gun debate, CTV, right? We have these laws on the book, regardless of what you think of them. And instead of enforcing them, people are like, well, we need more laws. It's the same with corporate America. Like, oftentimes, we don't enforce
it sounds like there's a breakdown of morality then.
Well, I mean, we've let our system.
I ran across the same situation, like whenever I was out working for a car hauling company, right? Now, because they had some vehicles stolen off of their truck, they decided they want to put a guideline in place saying that they were going to require the drivers to maintain possession of the keys to the vehicles that they had on their truck at all times, right? However, if I followed that guideline directly to the letter, right, that would have me breaking the FMCSR, or the Federal Motor Carriers Safety Regulations Manual, which you have to follow, right? And anytime that I'm doing any work in the employ of the motor carrier, I'm required to log that as on-duty time. If you're going to require me to keep these keys on my person at all times, even whenever I'm off the truck, then guess what? I can't ever log any off-duty time. So when I present them with this very idea and I ask them, hey, do you want me to also, like, are you telling me that if I'm parking the truck for a 34-hour reset, that you want me to take these keys to my home? And they're like, yes. And I'm like, well, I can't do that. Ultimately, because I wouldn't sign the paperwork, I got fired, right? Because I wouldn't volunteer to break the law. So there's just like that side of it. And then the other side of it is that we have people that go into the government to work and they understand what the law is, but because they might be buddy-buddy with somebody, they might not look as closely as they might at somebody else. So break down the morality. If you have like a code of conduct or a code of ethics, that should remain constant, and it shouldn't just be, oh, well, such and such, this and that when it comes to the law. You know what I mean? Or am I just...
I get you, but the problem is the law is not designed to take morality into effect, right? Like if law is cold, right? But it's necessary. So it's, for example, us four could sit here and we could watch two people steal thing. First person that steals something, they stole, a bunch of electronic equipment because they're just greedy. The second person that stole something to feed their family. Us four might say, if we were in charge of things, might say, let's give that second person a pass. We understand. But we can't have a legal system set up that way. The legal system has to have clearly defined limits. It says this is what's legal and this is what's not.
Well,
sometimes things that are illegal.
You could have that system, and like Seattle actually is. They either passed it or they're trying to. But Seattle passed a system where saying you're starving or saying like something like that is a defense to a crime. So you could have stuff like that. I think Seattle has actually either done it or is trying it.
Yeah, it'll be a disaster
the
because
last
people
I
will take
saw
advantage.
about Seattle's laws was that they were trying to make it so that if you were in like a certain tax bracket or made a certain amount of year, they would literally give you a leeway to breaking certain laws, because I mean it's kind of like saying, well, like they didn't know any better or they were desperate enough to. That was the last I remember reading about it. I'm gonna talk to my friend Journey Started. He's the one that's keeps me up to date on all the fun things happening in Washington, and I know he was the one that shared that article with me. And I don't know. It might seem moral on the surface, but I don't really see anything moral about trying to give somebody a pass because they're poor and don't know any better. That seems
No, of course not.
it seems
But it's beyond.
Democrats are doing the same thing with
It's-
illegal immigration too. They're like, they want to give all the illegal immigrants a pass because it's an emotional story that somebody is trying to make a better life for their family. And it's like, look, I agree. It's an emotional story. If somebody wants to make life better for their family, it's totally understandable. But I agree with Rob that it's a disaster when you start having a system based on that. I mean,
Yeah.
I would take issue with the other thing Rob said, which is that our laws are not, meant to be moral or something. I think all of our laws at their basis, the reason that we made them into laws is because that's what we think is moral. I mean, you wouldn't support a law if you thought that the law was immoral.
Yeah, right. But what I'm saying is, we don't. Once the law is set, we don't factor in once the law is set, we don't factor in morality, right? We don't say you can with sentencing guidelines. Obviously. And I know you've given examples of when
discretion of a
it goes the
judge.
opposite way, like Seattle. Right. When you're talking about Seattle or illegal immigration, but it becomes a disaster. I mean, Merrick
Right.
Garland today said that he views what happened at the Capitol as a coup, but he does not view the riots that attacked federal buildings in the summer, that was Black Lives Matter and Antifa. He doesn't believe that was a coup. Why? Because it was nighttime. So the
That's
when
not
police
what he
station and
said.
courthouses went home.
That's not what he said. Is it really? Oh my god.
LCTRfan, did you hear this? Right?
No, I didn't hear that, but I'm not surprised. I think I've been railing against the idea that what happened at January 6th was a coup or an insurrection. It's just so preposterous.
Right.
It's Democrats just changing changing words and twisting words definitions to things that they aren't, just to fit their own narrative. And
wait,
just like
lecture
Trump
fan.
didn't incite anything either.
LCTRfan, you're telling me that the old grandma walking around the Capitol building in between like the red velvet rope, that person wasn't performing a coup of the United States government?
Correct.
What?
Endernax,
And then
welcome.
saying it's an armed insurrection when nobody had guns. I mean, it's just the whole messaging around it has been so preposterous, and they're acting like it's a
Ironically-
9/11. Like if you didn't know any better, you would have think that there was thousands and thousands of dead bodies after that, but of course there wasn't.
Right. And ironically enough, if they had, like, let's say that 250,000 people did go to Washington, D.C. to perform a coup and on purpose brought firearms, they would have successfully couped the government.
Right. Like the government was not going to fall. Like to think that the government we just about got overthrown, guys. Oh my gosh. They just about overthrew the US government. It's so stupid.
But
So here's the
only
quote of what
comparison that I want to make when it comes to like Black Lives Matter and then the January 6th incident is that politicians had no problem with the riots until they started coming down their streets, right? That's when they said, well, this rioting is enough. Of Mayor Lightfoot, I think, was the one that had blocked off like the street to her house in case the rioting for Black Lives Matter got so bad. And I think it's the same theme when it comes to what happened on the 6th. They really only give a shit if it's their lives possibly in danger. That's when they start to pretend to care. And it hit a little too close to home. So that, I mean, I don't think
that's
if
true,
it
but-
was an empty building, I don't think they would have given a fuck. They only care because it was them at risk, because Ted
I
Cruz
do
tried to kill
disagree.
AOC.
I do disagree with that. They care. That's definitely true. But they would have cared even if it was an empty building because it was Republican, because it was Trump support. That's all this was. It was look, anyone that has any foresight, whatever. What happens if you tell one over and over, you could go out and use violence and property destruction? $2 billion in property destruction we saw in the riots that occurred in the spring and summer. Depending on the numbers you look at, anywhere from 27 to 57 people dead as a result of these riots. The own numbers from the Princeton study that the Black Lives Matter defenders use says 7% of their rallies resulted in violence. That's 223 unique locations. That doesn't count riot or the amount of times that violence occurred, just the locations. So somewhere like Portland that had 90 days, that only counts as one. And they didn't care. They made excuses.
How many deaths did you say?
That's not terrorism. That's not terrorism, by the way. They refuse to count that as terrorism.
No, it's not.
Which is insane.
Right. It said 27 to 57 are the numbers.
27 to 57. Okay. 57. I've been curious about that. I didn't know that's what it was.
Yeah, that's the numbers I've seen. And I try to give the lowest and the best thing just so. But
Endernax, I sent you the Endernax, I sent you the link to the whereby, buddy.
He wants
if you want to jump in here.
I have to go put on clothes.
Bro, put on a hoodie, right?
Well, I have a shirt on. It's just I'm in my underwear. All right. Give me a sec.
So he's in his underwear.
But
no, it's my house.
Dude, this is the first night that the Wolf's Den whereby is being used, right? So you want to be a part of this moment. You know what I mean? This is a moment.
But yeah, just to finish. So what happens when you tell one side it's okay to riot? Inevitably, here's the truth about extremists. They're extremists on every political ideology. My favorite politician was Ron Paul. There were extremist Ron Paul supporters. There are extremist Romney supporters. There are extremist Bernie supporters. There might be more extremist Bernies, but there's nutbags capable of doing something on all political sides. If you constantly tell one side that's rioting over and over, this is okay, inevitably, the other side's going to be like, okay, we'll play that game too. Right. And that's what happened. And so the establishment, it's not just the Democrats, but they set the dominoes up saying inevitably someone will do stupid. And when they do, when a Trump supporter does something stupid, we're going to strike. And we're going to say, oh, we need 25,000 troops. This was an insurrection. We need a 9/11 style commission. Mitch McConnell went to Trump and was basically like, guess what, buddy? You're out now. You're going to basically walk out with between your legs, or we're going to convict you in the Senate of impeachment. This was all designed. So yeah, there is certainly part of it that's they didn't want to be personally attacked. They're fearful of that. But there's also part of they set these dominoes up. This is what they wanted to happen, right?
Yeah.
They wanted a Rittenhouse situation. They wanted the McCloskeys to defend themselves. So they could say, they accuse you of exactly what they are. They say that you're the terrorist, you're the violent one, while they excused this violence directed at you and people like you all spring and summer. And when someone predictably reacts, they say, oh, let's not leave this crisis go to waste. Let's start enacting all the authoritarian garbage that we had planned for them in the first place.
Right. So LCTRfan, bro, welcome to the Wolf's Den, right? Glad you're here tonight.
Thank you.
Look, I've got to see, we've obviously done some panels together, right? We do, obviously, just like Rob and Endernax, right? We do great together as a team. But I don't know much about the guy. You know, I've obviously been by your stream a few times, right? Seen you flying some planes, seen you playing a big ass RPG, or not RPG, a big ass RTS, right? Yeah. But like, bro, like, what is there to know
behind the beard?
Yeah, who's the man behind the beard? There we go.
Dude, I am your typical small town Montanan. Like, I grew up in a small town in Montana, you know, riding bikes around the neighborhood, just honestly, I feel so blessed to have had the childhood I had and growing up in small town Montana, where it was, man, it was such an awesome community. All my friends lived in the neighborhood. We had a BMX track down at the park. We'd go down there in the winter. There'd be an ice skating rink at the park. And I mean, it was like, completely safe town. Almost everybody in town was conservative. Everybody went to the same church. It was like a true community. And so I had two loving parents. I feel really lucky to have had both parents, in the house. We had family dinners every night, eating dinner around the dinner table, saying prayers before dinner. I mean, just I feel so lucky to have had that kind of a childhood. Did not have a TV in the house growing up. My parents would not allow television in the house. And frankly, it's one of the reasons I attribute to, the success I had in school is because we did not have a TV growing up. And when we did finally get a TV when I was, I think maybe in high school or something, maybe junior high, we would only then bring the TV out for things like the Olympics or something like that. So it was
Oh, wow.
quite a different growing up. And so then
Never the Winter Olympics, because the Winter
Right.
Olympics sucks.
So my friends that did have like a NES, Nintendo Entertainment System, oh my God, I'd love to go over to my friend's house and play Nintendo. Like, and my parents hated game consoles, wouldn't let me have a game console. Maybe that's one of the reasons I'm like so addicted to gaming still to this day, is because I was like deprived of gaming when I was young. But no, I grew up talking politics with my dad too every night. Like, I attribute a lot of my politics interest to the conversations me and my dad had growing up over the kitchen table, and every dinner at night talking about politics. And then I ran for student body president my senior year of high school and won, and was student body president, which doesn't say much. Look, it was a very small town. It was a very small high school. It's not some big accomplishment, but that was like kind of I guess got me interested in politics. It was a race. It was just a lot of fun. And then I studied politics in college, and then went to law school originally because I wanted to be in politics. And I realized, man, so many people in politics have law degrees, and so many politicians have law degrees. My original intent on going to law school was to actually make it in politics. But then something happened when I was in law school, which is the 2012 election, where I was actually very like, man, that hit me emotionally pretty hard, the 2012 election, because I actually thought Mitt Romney had a chance. It was obviously he didn't. You look back on it, like, he never had a prayer. But I was like so invested in it, and I was young. I was young. I hadn't like emotionally matured, really, I wouldn't say. Compared to like even the Donald Trump loss, even though it was like, in terms of for the country and the impact, is so much worse. It didn't impact me in the same way emotionally, because I'm older and kind of lived through that experience. But then I also saw a lot of Republicans sort of not being true believers and not staying true to their beliefs. And it was everybody I knew in politics was just there to expand their own power and make money. And so I just got really kind of soured on politics after that. And then started practicing law and really enjoyed it and stuff. So that's why I do it. But, look, I grew up listening to Rush Limbaugh too with my dad. And if you look at my Twitch profile, which I wrote in 2014, maybe 2015 is when I first started doing politics on Twitch, I put in there AM talk radio as one of the things that inspired me. And so, after I kind of gave up on politics after 2012, after basically being obsessed with it my whole life, then started practicing law, and then sort of learned about Twitch and stuff. And it was like, man, this is such like a great opportunity. I could have like my own little AM talk radio show, and I could play games at the same time. I still think that I'm the first one to ever do a politics focused stream. Obviously Destiny was talking politics on Twitch way before I was, but he was always a gamer first, politics second. I was like politics first, sort of gaming just on the side. Always wanted to have my own talk radio show, and I realized, wow, Twitch is like a way I could actually have kind of my own talk show. And so started streaming on Twitch, and I just love it, man. The Twitch politics scene has come so far from where it was in 2015. It's awesome. So, except for the fact that, it's a bunch of communists who are like evil and toxic as hell. But other than that, it's fine.
Dude, they are.
Literally the
Jeez.
worst type of, this website attracts the worst people. I mean, that's why I left.
It's horrible.
That's why I went to YouTube.
Yeah, no, it's bad.
Yeah. Weirdly enough,
why
I was
they
on
bother? Look,
I
like the
created
crime
Twitch.
royale, like the amount of mental gymnastics just to be able to like have like some semblance of fun is crazy,
They're
right?
so boring. They're like, oh, okay, it's supposed to be like that specific thing is a battle royale. It's supposed to be fight to the death, and they're sitting there like, oh well, if you see here on paragraph 4 subsection B of the Das Kapital, you could see Karl Marx. Who cares? Shut up.
No, you know what? They expose themselves as being extremists and totally out of touch with America, because me and my positions, are not too far off from what Rob believes, or CTV, or maybe Endernax and Madman. But at least for me personally, like the way that they react, they're just shocked that somebody could believe what I believe. And I'm like, why are you guys? Why are
But
you
they're not,
surprised?
though.
There's like
But they're
100
not. It's
100
all
million
it's all
Americans.
fake. You know,
Because
it's
they're
all just a
egotistical.
show.
They're consumed, but they're consumed
No,
by
I
themselves.
I honestly think that they actually
Madman,
have no
you're-
idea that there's
Madman,
100 million Americans that feel like me.
Madman, what were you saying?
Oh, that it's just a show. You know what I mean? It's just they want to be like, oh my God, you said abortion is murder? Like,
Wait, you're pro-life?
I'm
Oh my
convinced
goodness.
they
Like,
I'm
you hate
convinced they
women?
really I'm convinced they really don't know that there's 100 million Americans out there that think and feel exactly like all of us do.
well, then you can blame Twitter and you can blame Facebook for that because they shut other opinions.
That's true.
They
Right.
can't
That's true.
hear other people's perspectives.
Right,
They
and then
don't
you-
even
yeah.
think we're real people.
And then
That's
you
what I
come
keep
on
trying to
Twitch and
tell
it's
you guys,
communist.
my viewers.
Yeah, and I think that
Sometimes seem to be.
there's a lot. Look, I say this all the time. People talk about privilege and stuff. I don't mind having these conversations. Want to know what real conservative privilege I have? It's being a conservative, because I've had to fight for my beliefs and people pushing back against my beliefs ever since I started saying them. Right, and that actually is a privilege, because you learn to have thick skin. You learn to be able to defend your ideas. You understand that there are people that disagree with you. People aren't just going to go, oh my God, you're right. Everything you say is so special. These panels make me laugh. So look, I'm just going to say something. This isn't going to be popular with a lot of people. It's going to make me sound arrogant. Some of these people on some of these panels have no clue what they're talking about, but they're saying the right things. They're repeating the things that they've heard other popular people say. And so it's like, yay, high fives. They've never had anyone in their life tell them, like, well, defend that position. You know, not everyone thinks that way, right? They went through K through 12 school where they're basically everybody agrees with this sort of left-wing establishment narrative. Then they went to college where everyone agrees with that. Then they watch their entertainment where all of the entertainers agree with that. Then they go to Twitch and they go to Twitter and they go to Facebook and everybody's agreeing with them there. And they lose sight of the fact, like you said, LCTRfan, there are millions of people like, no, that's not how we think. And they're incapable of having a serious, not everyone, there's some good, don't get me wrong, but many of them are incapable. They're just incredulous. How dare you disagree with them? You must be a horrible person. That's all they could come up with. It's laughable to me.
It's funny because actually, so when I was into politics, like maybe barely, like the anti-SJW stuff before I was 18, but I didn't really get into politics until I was 18. And it was Bernie Sanders who got me into politics. And it was the only reason that I have different political opinions than whatever the DNC or the progressive wing of the party would have just shoved down my throat, because I really was ignorant of basically every political tenet, any arguments. Like, I thought genuinely that conservatives were just racist. The only reason any of that happened was because one of my best friends freshman year, I called him a racist. I don't even remember why. He makes fun of me all the time for it now. I don't remember why I called him a racist. I can't imagine. I'm like, you're not a racist. Like, obviously not. But he pushed back on me because he was a conservative, and he just pushed back. He was like, you're an idiot. Like, and here's the 10 reasons why. And I had no idea how to answer him. And that was what started me on my journey, you know, where I started watching Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder, all these different types of media personalities, and just introducing new ideas to my diet. I got addicted to Jordan B. Peterson and Joe Rogan and all these different things. And I mean, that was what, 5 years ago now, but that's what they are. They're me when I was a freshman in college. They never got past calling the conservative racist because they never actually heard a pushback. They were with their liberal friends and they all said, yeah, conservatives are racist.
Yeah.
And
That's like a lot of the
gonna get into
conversations. That's like a lot of the conversations I've had with them over the last few months, right? Like, we started talking about climate change, right? And then I'm like, well, I said, how serious are you trying to take this thing? Why don't we build reactors on the African continent and then start following that water into the Sahara Desert to make a new rainforest? And they're like, what the hell are you even talking about? And it's like, well, I don't know. How big are you thinking? Right? Are you just trying to control it here at the local level and then like create all these EPA guidelines for X, Y, and Z reasons? Are they actually having the effect? You know, like, so are you just trying to control us here, or are you really trying to come together as an entire planetary society? Right? I don't know. Like, and they don't know what to do with that.
Right. And again, let me be quite clear for anyone listening. I'm not saying everyone on the left. I'm not saying every left-wing streamer on Twitch, but I'm just saying a large portion of what I see, not just on Twitch or YouTube, but also with people that control the narrative on the left, is the abdication of personal responsibility, right? So I will talk to people You know, I saw Endernax, you debated Vosh. I was on a panel with Vosh, and him and Mike from PA, and they're just yelling at me, you know, climate change. You're a science denier. There's a consensus. There's a consensus. I'm like, okay, what's the consensus? Let's hear it. What's the consensus? Well, you know, the climate's changing. I'm like, I agree. There's a consensus. Humans are contributing. Yep, I agree. That's a consensus. Okay, go further. That's it. That's the end of the consensus. Can either of you that apparently think this is one of the biggest issues in the world tell me how much we have to reduce emissions by what time in order to stave off these horrible impacts? And they have no clue. They're Googling, right? If this is your premier issue. But anyways, it goes back and forth, back and forth. And Vosh says this. He says, I would have no problem giving up 99% of my income to fight climate change. And I'm like, okay, do it. And he's like, you know, only if the government made me. And I'm like, this in a nutshell.
I saw that. Yeah, you caught his ass on that one.
It doesn't make sense because what they're suggesting is they shouldn't have to abide by the own moral justifications and rules that they want everyone else to abide by. So that's why you can see, you know, we see all of these people embracing lockdowns. They're unwilling to do them themselves. We see them embracing climate change. You know, your light bulbs are the problem as they fly on private jets. And you can see it with these streamers too, where, you know, you have socialist streamers talking about the evils of capitalism, selling their t-shirts, raking in big bucks and things like that. And I agree. Man,
I lost Rob.
pay you by all means, but it blew my mind, the disconnect. These people that will more like someone saying to me, "You're wrong," I have no problem with. But someone saying like, "I'm a better person than you because of my political beliefs," well, then you better be able to back that up with your actions, not just your words. And I see that to me is the fundamental disconnect where I see with so many people when I'll be streaming, it always devolves into I'm a shitty person and they're a good person, and I don't see any evidence for that.
Two leftists in my entire life who have actually been consistent in their moral values. And the reason I know this is because they run a solidarity, quote unquote, solidarity collective household company. I don't even know what that means, but basically they have like a house and they have 10 different people living there. It's like styled like a commune. They have their own like podcast and businesses and all these different things, and they all share each other's wealth. That's the only time I've ever run into a leftist who lived their values. Every other time, it's just these LARPers on the internet who probably live in their lived in their parents' basement for a very long time, had never worked, like maybe they worked at Starbucks and became disgruntled because they weren't getting paid $20 an hour at Starbucks. Like there's legitimate reasons to be a little miffed in life. Like, oh, maybe, you know, sure, there was like a former pathway to a manufacturing jobs that led to a middle-class lifestyle that's gone now because of globalization and shitty trade deals. Like I could understand being a little miffed about that. But the answer is from there is not, that's why we need authoritarian communism across the planet.
Right.
No, CTV had someone on his channel. I won't name this person, but CTV will know exactly what I'm talking about. This person was saying that they didn't want to legalize drugs across the board because then he would fall back into his heroin addiction, and that that was pretty much like his only reason not for doing this drug was because it is currently illegal. And it devolved into this really weird abstract conversation about a man who was married being seduced by some vixen, right? And if he was seduced by this vixen, it was not solely the man's fault for having this affair, that it was just as morally distasteful for the woman to have seduced the married man. And so I'm thinking that he wants the government to be able to control situations to stop people from making bad decisions. And that is, I think, it was a perfect descriptor actually to see that he really wasn't a conservative if he believes in that sort of, you know, mommy and daddy need to babysit me because I don't know how to control my own actions.
I don't know how much I agree with this sentiment. Maybe you could say I'm not a conservative because I don't agree, but like this is I obviously have very weird heterodox stupid like political opinions all over the spectrum. But the point is, like, I was thinking about this earlier. I was thinking about pornography. I was thinking about how an estimated 80% of men have used pornography in like the last week. that's pretty much an epidemic, right? When we have all these studies that show that there's adverse effects on men, as far as like erectile dysfunction has gone up 1,000%. People aren't staying in the relationships as long. 56% of divorces cite pornography use as something that contributed to them getting divorced. There's all these societal problems that come with widespread pornography use. And it turns out almost 50% of kids, of people aged 14 and older, boys aged 14 and older, are using pornography. And if that happens, about 90% of them will continue to use up and further into their adulthood. Well, what are the ramifications of having access to something that stimulates your dopamine receptor so much that it feels like you're having sex, like it's equivalent, and so your brain gets used to the idea that you're having sex technically to your brain, even though you cognitively know different. Your brain's reacting in the same way as if you were having sex with a different person or a different woman every single day. What does that do to a man's brain? What does that do over time, especially when it's so easy to access and it's so easy to go back into it if you're addicted, if you're already in the habit of using pornography all the time?
Don't you think that there's other things that stimulate dopamine just as much? Like, I think maybe we are just overstimulated in general.
So the only things that have similar effects, they measured it in rats, was drugs, was things like cocaine, was things like methamphetamine, was sex. It's not the same as looking at a sunset. It's not the same as doing a pleasurable activity. The closest things that it's to are sex and drugs.
So I want to go back here just for a minute.
It would have been
right?
rock and roll if rats could appreciate rock and roll.
I don't know. I think there's a difference when you have it widely available to you. Everybody's got a phone now. Everybody's got internet. It's like, and it's something you can become addicted to, and it's widely available to children. I mean, I can't open a tab and download cocaine and then use it as a kid. That's all I'm gonna say.
All right, well, we're going to segue into this next conversation, right? Because I want to go back and address LCTRfan. Bro, thanks for sharing that. The small town Montana story, right?
Heck yeah.
I had a lot of similar in the mountains of North Carolina. So it was just more laid back. You know, it was a different time. I had the NES growing up. I didn't have some weird restriction on the TV thing. But a matter of fact, the conversation that I had today is like the Nintendo Zapper for the NES. It was so great with Duck Hunt, right? You can't actually use those today because flat panel TVs won't work with it. It's got to be a CRT. So somehow when technology advances, it just gets left behind in that regard. You know what I mean?
I know.
So Endernax, right? We're kind of taking this moment to just kind of share a little bit about ourselves. Like, you know, like with LCTRfan, we said it was the man behind the beard, right? So who's the man behind the chin, right? Who's this guy?
I thought you were gonna say suit, which I think, but I'll take it. Gosh, I'm a weirdo. I grew up in Southern California, in the suburbs in San Diego, San Marcos, actually. You know, we had I grew up in a conservative, traditional Catholic family, very restrictive on like access to the computer, to the TV. We lived right across from the elementary school, so we were often outside all the time. We played. We would go to the beach all the time. We'd go to amusement parks. Both my parents are special education teachers, so they would get these little slips from like the different theme parks to give to their students. But they only had like 20 students, so they'd give enough to each of their students, basically free passes to all of these different amusement parks, and then they'd have tons left over. And so we ended up we got to go to Legoland all the time. I lived there till I was about 7. We moved to northern Wyoming, outside a town called Level, Wyoming. I don't live there anymore. It's a town of about 2,000 people. We lived 10 miles outside of that town on a 120-acre farm right next to Zeller's Queen Bee's farm. No longer there, sadly, but they're the only honey farm in all of Wyoming. They made candy on the.
Why did you move? You got to tell us why you moved. What was?
You're right. Yeah, we moved because my aunt died, and it was really hard on my mom because they were really close, and both our families lived apart. My aunt and her family lived in Nevada, and we would go up and visit all the time. They lived in like rural Amargosa Valley. We didn't want to move to Nevada. They didn't want to move to California, so we picked they found a house in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming, and we moved when I was 7.
What jobs were they able to get there?
So my dad stayed in California, finishing his master's degree, and then he came up and got a special education job. My uncle and my cousin, we formed this like giant family unit essentially. So they were working at an Amcoal factory, which is like bentonite. So they were processing bentonite into products, and that paid actually pretty well. They started at $12 an hour, and this was back in like I don't even like before the housing crisis, I think, if my memory serves. I mean, I was 7 years old, so yeah. So we moved out there, and they supported the entire family unit. My mom was a homemaker. She was on disability out of the state of California because she had a brain disorder that gives her like crippling migraines, so she can't focus for very long. So anyway, she just stayed at home and took care of the kids and was a homemaker. And then, you know, I grew up there, and it was a completely different environment. Our town was 90% Mormon. So, and we were Catholic, and they did not like us very much. That's okay though. We still got along. Went to school, you know, all the
Because
time.
Mormons have to be nice in order to get their own planet, so of course they were friendly
That's
enough.
true. They were as nice as they could be to Catholics, I guess. But yeah, on the main street of the town, there's just this giant Mormon temple, like the biggest one you'll ever see in a small town, right across from the main grocery store, the biggest building in the town easily. So yeah, we lived there for probably until I was 15 or 16. At which point we had expanded the farm to be, we had a trailer, the big farmstead house, we had a cabin, and we had a second house that we had actually moved. You can move houses. Who knew? I didn't know, but found that one out. I got really like sad and lonely and depressed, I guess. It was mostly my fault because, well, we won't get into it, but basically I consumed too much food based on emotional issues I was having. I read a lot of books. I became very introverted for a time. I ballooned up to 320 pounds. We moved to Denver, the Denver metropolitan area, because my dad lost his job, and my parents were really obsessed with this Dave Ramsey stuff of getting out of debt, and our house was worth a lot more. So they were looking to downsize basically. And we found a foreclosed home in the Denver metropolitan area. My dad found a job there. So we ended up moving there after spending a year and a half, probably, selling the house as well as living in a trailer in southern Wyoming. And my dad was working at, I think it was either FedEx or UPS or something, part-time to get by. So then we moved to the Denver metropolitan area. We found a foreclosed house. We lived there for about a year. It was a pretty small house for, well, I have 6 siblings. I should have mentioned that. I have 6 siblings, so big Catholic family. After my dad, we lived in that area, that small house in the Denver area for a while. Eventually, we found another foreclosed house that was bigger, moved to that one, and then we ended up. I turned 16, and I had had enough of just being like, I guess, stuck. So I started reading things like Jordan B. Peterson stuff. I started looking more into like, okay, how do I fix myself? Because clearly this isn't working. I'm 320 pounds. I'm very unhappy. I'm introverted. I'm playing video games all the time. I'm not doing anything productive. So lost 120 pounds over the course of 2 years. Planned on joining the military. Was then conned into going to university. I also forgot to mention I graduated high school at 16, and then I worked at Subway. So I was going to go to university. I had a full ride scholarship, but I ended up leaving because I wasn't mature enough to actually like do college. I was emotionally very immature. And even though I was getting B's, I just couldn't deal with it. Also, I was isolated from the rest of the adults. That's why I ultimately decided to lose weight, was because I felt very detached from everybody else. And I felt very lonely and sad and depressed all the time. Anyways, so I went back home. I lost the weight. I was planning on enlisting in the Air Force. I've been talking to a recruiter, and my cousin, who I am 95% certain was enlisted by my parents to get me to go to college because they wanted me to go to college, came up to me and said, "Hey, you know, there's an Air Force ROTC program at this university that you still have your full ride to. I want to go back to university too. Why don't you, instead of going through the enlistment process, why don't you go become an officer and go back to university?" And lo and behold, I go and do that. And 2 weeks before classes start, she's like, "Oh yeah, I'm not going to go back to university. So pretty sure she never planned on doing so. I went to university. I met my beautiful fiance, who I intend on marrying at the earliest convenience. Was in
You know
air.
what they say?
What's that?
There's no time like the present.
That's true. That's true. But I don't have enough money for a ring right now, to be completely real with you. That's the only thing holding me back.
Let me put it to you like this, man. It's not the value or the cost of the ring that matters. It's the way in which it's given,
Yeah,
and what is behind it. Because if she really loves you, that's all that's going to matter.
I mean, I think
Wise words.
I agree. I think that's good words. We would go get married at the courthouse tomorrow if there wasn't societal expectations that we have a big Catholic wedding. So that's what we're planning.
You're still suffering from Catholic guilt. This is the shit I was talking about earlier, CTV.
Listen, the communitarian bonds are strong. Okay, you can't.
Yeah.
At least one of the sides of the family will be really pissed. So
I got you. So then maybe, well, I guess what we all saw Braveheart, right? Isn't there like a way you can make your way out into the woods and do like a little ribbon wrapping or it's
Yeah, that ended up well. Right?
no, right?
he just died. No big deal.
I wanted to ask specifically Endernax, but anyone else too that's on the panel about how they felt about Ayn Rand, because I know Endernax is not a fan, but I was wondering if anybody else, felt the same way as him.
Atlas Shrugged was a great book.
You read the whole thing, huh?
I did read the whole thing, yeah. No, I don't necessarily agree with everything that Ayn Rand says, but but I generally agree with a lot of the sort of principles behind the Atlas Shrugged book, which is that people deserve to be able to work and to reap the fruits of their labor.
Yeah. I liked BioShock.
I
It was
think-
a great game.
Yeah. More of an indictment of Ayn Rand, I think BioShock was than anything. I'm not going to claim to be an expert on Ism. I haven't read a lot, but here's my one problem I have with it. I would guess if I got to sit down and talk to Ayn Rand, that it would be explained to me very differently than some of my a-hole friends that have claimed to be objectivist and used it as justification for doing a-hole things. So to them, it's what they took out of it was, hey, I could be selfish and do whatever I want, and who gives a shit? And I don't think that's what she was trying to say. Not like that, anyways. So it's one of those things. It's like, why don't I like the Grateful Dead? Well, it's not because the Grateful Dead's not good. I actually enjoy their music. I can't stand the Deadheads. That's why I don't like the Grateful Dead. So with Ayn Rand, that's how I feel with Ayn Rand. Like some of the people, not everyone, but
the neo-Satanist movement actually cite Ayn Rand as their key philosopher. Basically, that Satanism in its essence is just individualism put up to the umpteenth degree. Because then you have no responsibilities to your community, to your church, to the people around you, to make sure that their spiritual well-being is such. That's a very Catholic thing for me to say, but I'll say that for me, Ayn Rand, not a huge fan, and I'm not a huge fan simply because I feel like there is a responsibility, especially for conservatives, to realize that their culture is not born out of cities, that ultimately there is a certain type of culture and ideology and political spectrum that exists exclusively to rural communities, to certain suburban communities where faith is held and where values are not easily given up. That this does not exist in the cities, and in large part, in my mind, it's because if you have just infinite access to vices, it's very hard to maintain a moral lifestyle. If you're living in Las Vegas and you're surrounded by people who are selling drugs and sex, and there's billboards across the street with naked women on them all over the place, it is not a very good place to try and raise a child or raise a family that is going to have values that support conservatism in general. And I think that if you boil everyone down to an individual, and that you worship, in my opinion, at the altar of capitalism, what you get is everybody is an economic input, and that input where that input goes changes depending on where the economy goes. And right now, we're seeing all of the economy go into these giant liberal cities. And that's my concern. I want to conserve the rural communities that are dying right now. I don't think we
Right.
should abandon them.
But like
Well,
Ayn Rand's like whole philosophy though about like thinking for yourself though, it's not necessarily stemmed from like being a dick to the people around you.
Oh, yeah, no.
She uses this example once in this conversation she had about how a man is taking care of his dying wife, and he's doing it for simply selfish reasons. It's not just because he loves her and wants the best for her. The whole the bottom line is when you love someone that you're with, or you love the people in your community, you are making the sacrifices to make sure that you have them in your life for as long as possible. As this man is doing everything he can to save his wife, but it's not for her sake, it's for his, because he can't imagine his life without her. And that's what love is. It's doing things for selfish reasons and that happen to benefit the other person.
I mean, I don't like, this is the problem.
I can't hear
That,
Rob
like,
now.
I know
Rob,
Endernax, we were
Rob.
just talking about
I don't know what it is, man. Tonight your mic has been kind of like breaking up.
I think it's his internet connection.
I think it's his internet too. You're dropping packets. We're getting
Well.
packet loss.
Let's see if I can refresh or something. Am I still sounding terrible?
No, we can hear you.
I'll just
now.
power through it. If it drops, I'll restart or something. But no, like the problem is, like, some people they bastardize like these philosophers, and if you're not read in them yourself, you just take someone's word for it, right? How many times have I heard not real communism, right? Not real communism. No, you need to really understand what Marx was saying, and they're just
Right.
spewing garbage. Like, it's not really a historical
So
reality.
much.
But here's one thing I will say. That it speaks to kind of what I think objectivism maybe means. I was talking about earlier, this idea of morality. I don't mind anyone disagreeing with me. In fact, I think we should talk to people that disagree about what's best for the country and what's best for things. What I draw the line at is when it becomes a question of morality, where people say, I'm better than you because I have this belief. And I think that it's not that you can't say that, but it just makes the discussion really crappy, in my opinion. And what you end up seeing is this. Like the discussion I had earlier, like I was saying about climate change and whether you're putting your own money up. You have people that think they're moral because they're advocating for government policies, but they're unwilling to change their behavior until the government forces them. So I'll give you an example. I have many, many people that told me healthcare is a human right. It's an absolute human right, and we should be providing for people's healthcare. And I'll say, sweet, I know you're a wealthy person. I give you a list of 5 people right now in my rural community that don't have healthcare. Would you like to sponsor them? Would you like to give them money? And they're like, no, I don't want to do that. I'll only give the money if the government forces other people to give money, right? That's not morality. You can argue that that's strategically what's best for the country. We can have a debate about it. But you don't get to claim that you're a moral person because you're saying, well, actually, I'm going to keep robbing banks, but I'll advocate the government makes robbing banks illegal.
And then they'll sit there and unironically say that all of the conservatives that are right now doing mission trips in Africa, taking care of the poor, building schools, getting them clean water, getting them food, getting them clothing, doing basically, what am I looking for here?
Charity?
Well, charity, yes, but I'm thinking more like biblical terms. Faith through works. I don't remember the exact term. Whatever, it doesn't matter. Okay. The point being is that they'll accuse these people of being morally bereft, evil, racist, piles of garbage when they're going and trying to help the most needy people in the world, and then they'll try to ascribe those people to have negative connotations towards their visitation in the first place by saying things like, "Oh, well, they're only there because they look down on these people." Because they think that that they have to go there and spread the word of Jesus. And if they don't, these people are going to burn in hell. That's the only reason they're doing it. No, it's because the culture that is born in Christian communities, in conservative communities, is one where it isn't just about you. guess what, buddy? You're gonna die one day, and you're gonna be judged by your actions on this planet. And it has nothing to do, even if you're not a Christian, even if you don't believe in God, you're still going to be judged by your actions. And so that's why Christians have this tradition of helping.
Yeah, no, that's why all of the data shows, all the studies show that conservatives donate way more to charity. And frankly, that's one of the biggest misconceptions on the left about conservatives. You know, like, frankly, one of the reasons I'm conservative is because I care deeply about the lowest of the low income and the poorest of the poor. One of the reasons I support conservatism and the Constitution and free markets and everything else is because I care about the poor. And like these leftists who think that, you know, unless you support communism that you don't care about the poor is just so off base. Like, frankly, one of the reasons I'm a conservative is because I care so much about the poor. Like, this is such a misconception on the left. And, you know, they do it to make themselves feel better, I think. Like, they could never imagine that a conservative supports conservative policy because they care about the poor and they want to help the poor. They could never imagine that. You know, they also could never imagine that the policies that they support are actually harming the very people that they're allegedly trying to help. I mean, it's all so messed up.
And to me, it's the exact opposite, right? They feel that their words or their hypothetical philosophical positions make them moral persons, but their actions are irrelevant. We feel the actions are more important when it comes to morality. This is a different question than what is strategically best for society. We're talking about morality. So when I was in the debate community, you know, one of the things, everyone's super left wing, and I was all the time of being accused of being a racist or this and that. I got to my time I went to Dallas. There was a tournament in this like 4-star hotel in Dallas, and most of the people working at this hotel were Hispanic. Most of them didn't speak English. So you have these debate rounds, and you got all this evidence, and people call me racist, and I don't care about the border, and you know, people in other countries and this and that. And then the round ends. You know what the people that were saying that did? They left their garbage everywhere. They just expected the help to clean it up. I stuck around and helped. Then I got like, because it was a big tournament, I got like $30 per meal. So I asked these people that barely spoke English, I'm like, hey man, I'm heading to Jack in the Box. You guys want to come with me? So 2 people that barely spoke English just hung out at Jack in the Box. And still the next round, I was the racist. I was the terrible person. And it's just like, you can see this arrogance, like when oftentimes when you hear like, I know this is an easy target, but like, remember when Alyssa Milano was tweeting in like 2017, if we had a border wall, who would clean my yard? Who would clean my house? Who would mow my yard? Like the arrogance is
talks about like how this kind of this self-righteous idea that like you should always be like giving your last dollar. It just keeps going and going and going to the point where if you were born with any sort of a privilege, if you aren't sharing every single piece of food that you have with someone that is less fortunate, you're a bad person. You literally need to starve to death in order to keep up this fake self-righteous ideology about how like you actually care about the poor and how they're all just a bunch of phonies, because you can't live up to that. You can't starve yourself in order to keep giving to people that are less fortunate than you.
I feel like Christ is a better example of how to do this in the first place. It's not like Christ didn't own anything. He had clothes. He had, you know, by all accounts had sandals. Now that's not saying that he could feed himself. Obviously, he's God on earth according to Scripture. But the point being is that there were things that Jesus and his disciples owned. They had money. They took donations. But they were never wealthy. They never displayed their wealth. They never bragged about their wealth. They used that. And it's not even like an expectation that everyone should act like Christ. It's just that if you were going to look for a way to act in the world that you like, insofar as you wanted to help as many people as possible, the Christ-like model, or striving to be as Christ-like as possible, which is what you should be doing on this earth, is the model. It isn't the Ayn Rand, or the communist, like you have to give up everything model, although that is effectively what they want to happen. And they really just don't get their ideology. And it's so clear because they'll go on and and Bosch will act all pretentious and act like he's so offended that like that you don't think that socialism is market socialism, that you don't think that socialism is just these worker co-ops. But in all actuality, they fully admit this. And that's why that Richard Wolff quote that I used during the debate is so damning. Like that they just straight up admit that they don't know what socialism is, and it depending on what they feel they could defend the best. They don't care what it is. They just want to achieve it. It's an abstract idea.
See, that's where, like, a lot of times where I get into arguing socialism with these people, right? They, like, ultimately, I make them describe what it is that they want from a community, and right, and obviously they start off well at the lowest level possible. We want the workers to be able to own the means of production, right? So then we start talking into how do we get to that point. It's like, well, okay, so we need these laws at this level here, and then we got to be able to do this, and it's like, ultimately, what they end up describing to me is a constitutional republic, right? So I have them work through all the whole idea, right? Starting at the lowest level, communities working together, then like the county, and then like the state, and and it's like by the time they get to the end of it, they've described to me how the American constitutional republic is supposed to be in their ideal. They're just trying to associate it with a different word, and it's like, this is why we had to go through this mental exercise. You know what I mean?
Thank you for
Endernax,
inviting me on
you said that
C2B. I'm going to go now. Rest
Well,
my case.
Well, thank you for
Thank you
coming
so
by
much.
tonight, man.
Good
I'm
seeing you,
very
man.
happy. I wasn't expecting you to be here, but I'm so happy that you were.
Yes,
So happy
thank
that
you
you
very
were.
much. Lecture
good
fan, it's
chatting.
been a while. I hope
It
to
has
see you
been.
soon.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.
And Endernax, I think this might be the first time we've actually spoken. So
Yeah, I think so.
I appreciate it, guys. Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
See ya.
later.
hon.
We'll see ya. Endernax, I know you mentioned Jordan Peterson, right? Jordan Peterson tells this story about George Orwell writing the book The Road to Wigan Pier, right? And the way it was a serial, so he was commissioned to write it by socialists in London, and he's putting an episode out or a chapter every week in like their paper or whatever. And the first half of the book is Jordan Peterson explaining how these people that work on Wigan Pier and these coal mines, it's hell on earth. Like the conditions of the workers is deplorable. It's disgusting. And so the socialists love this stuff. Yeah. The second half of that book is Jordan, who was a self-identified socialist, making the argument, I have the sneaking suspicion that these socialists in London don't care at all about these people. Instead, they are exploiting the bad conditions these workers have in order to attack people that have more than them. And so these socialists have realized the way we can attack people that have more than us is to say, see, we care about the people that have less than us. So you ought to be ashamed for having more than us. And oftentimes it seems like their mentality is, I say this about Bernie Sanders. Bernie's millionaires were immoral until he became a millionaire. Now he says millionaires are immoral. What he's really saying is everyone that has 1 cent more than me is immoral. My wealth is legitimate. And that's one of the things that you can see the disingenuous nature, I think, of them.
And Bernie's always been, I mean, even since he was young, he's always been ideologically a Marxist. It hasn't been about, trying to build some sort of social democracy in America, which would be actually a reasonable goal. I wouldn't care. I'd be like,
Right.
okay, fair enough. Like, 1 second, I accidentally unplugged my microphone, but I can't hear you. But what I'll say is, they don't have like. What was I saying? I was complaining about Bernie Sanders, but the honest truth is, I had my own like hatred for a time of billionaires, and then I was like, do I really have any rational reason? Not really. Okay, let me be clear. Are there individual billionaires I don't like? Yeah. Well, what do I want to happen to them? Well, I'd like to see their actions regulated more. Who are those people? They're generally people who, engage in international capitalism to go and invest in places like China that I'm not a huge fan of. Like, I think that as a country, we should be like, maybe we don't invest in the authoritarian state apparatus that is hell-bent on controlling its citizens, committing genocide, and using totalitarian measures to propagandize their people. Like, maybe we shouldn't trade with those people. I don't know. But that's different in essence than just hating Jeff Bezos for holding Amazon stock, right?
Exactly.
Jeff Bezos was some weird-ass nerdy dude who sold books on the internet for decade or like a decade before he even rose to any type of prominence. Now, there might be problems with things Amazon does as a corporation, but am I really gonna like sit here and be like, oh, like how are you even gonna extract the wealth from Jeff Bezos? Are you gonna nationalize Amazon? Is that what you're gonna do?
Right. Yeah, and I have this same conversation. And again, like there are laws on the book, like so I have problems with the way that like the tech companies are censoring things, but we have laws to deal with monopolies and things like that. I feel that again, a lot of people just have a hatred for the wealthy because they hate that they perceive them as more successful than them. So I have no like this is what they'll say, but doesn't he have too much money? I'm like, let's say tomorrow, Endernax, you develop some sort of panacea, literally cure every disease in cures cancer, cures AIDS, diabetes, cures Alzheimer's. What's that worth? What percentage of the country's wealth would you deserve for coming up with some miracle cure like that literally changes like life expectancy for women goes from 75 to 120? Like, what's that worth? Are we going to say, well, you made your billion, that's it? Anything more than that's an unfair share. So it seems, it comes to, I think one of the problems is, in addition to abdicating self-responsibility, there's this desire to argue from the state of utopia. And they'll use the word "what about" it a lot, right? The truth is, when you have to compare it to something. So we could sit here and criticize capitalism all day. We could say, here are some problems that come up with capitalism. But what system are you comparing it to? And what they compare it to is utopia, right? And so, but there is no utopia. We will never get there. And the problem is when you pretend that you can get there, you make all sorts of bad decisions, right? So now you start advocating a bunch enough because after all, we're going to solve all of the problems of the world. This is exactly what Stalin ran into, right? Stalin, I don't think started off as a bloodthirsty maniac. He became one because he was going to achieve utopia. So everything was justifiable on that journey.
There's also an egomaniac type of a personality trait that you get with a lot of these people. It's like if you just had enough experts in a room and they sat around a table and came up with an authoritarian enough control system and implemented these tests, then all of a sudden everything would work out. You just have to convince enough of the stupid, dumb, poor people to come along with you in order for it to actually occur. I don't think that these people, like, I genuinely believe that they don't think that they're anything like the Bolsheviks or that they're anything like previous revolutionaries. They think that they're better. But then they'll go and they'll support groups and Marxist-Leninists across the planet who are literally the same type of revolutionaries that have existed throughout history. Like, there's just a complete disconnect. They don't realize, or if they do realize, they don't care because the ends justify the means. If they need to commit acts of terrorism, that's justified, right? And it's not to like get up on a soapbox and complain about communists. I obviously disagree with every single person here on economic takes. That's no secret.
Glad you bring up economics. I'm glad you bring that up, and maybe you can clarify some history for me, right? Because I did a study into the Roman history, right? A little bit with regard to economics back then, and when they were doing their coin clipping, right? Like, isn't that history directly correlative to what we're seeing today?
What were they doing with coin clipping?
Well, obviously, like a certain amount of weight of a coin, right, has a certain value. So they were clipping the edges off of it and then remelting them down to make more coins so that there are more coins in circulation, hoping that the people didn't notice. You know what I mean?
That's like, there's a whole lot of stuff going on there. They didn't really have fiat currency. They used rare earth minerals, which is, I think, a little different in how it works. There's a lot of problems with Roman decline that socialists say, oh, it's because they got rid of the grain dole or they stopped giving as much food to the poor, which in that society, actually lowering the grain dole actually meant potentially hundreds of thousands of peasants dying because they didn't have any access to food. But it's very complicated, and the Roman Empire lasted a very long time. So I don't know. Maybe. Does anybody know more about Roman history?
No.
LCTRfans got to know something, right? I see him playing that game all the time. You got to know something about the Romans and the economy, right?
I don't think. I mean, I don't think you have to look to Rome. currency, you can look to lots of different histories of currencies. I mean, look at every single country that has done what we're doing to their currency. It's not just Rome and, debasing their currency. That, look at every other country that's ever had a currency that's done what we're doing to our currency has had ultimately hyperinflation and a currency collapse. Now,
The Weimar Republic's a great example.
Yep.
yeah. So I think, it's not just the fall of the Roman Empire you can point to. I think you can look at the history of all different types of currencies.
Now,
And
the real question.
it's
Oh,
so
go ahead.
hard. I'll just say it's hard to explain to an average person why devaluing the currency is basically screwing over middle class and poor people, right? Like it's hard to explain that. And so this is one of the things I've been trying to say, right? Everything's seen intentions. So we have these lockdowns over COVID, and then we have the CARES Act, right? It's called the CARES Act. It's got to be good. And we have these stimuluses. We've given out, 2 so far? These have been one of the largest transfers of wealth from poor and working class people to the wealthy. And it's literally being done by the exact same people that are telling you, shame on you, you need to help poor people. So it's like, okay, what's your policy? Well, here's my ideas. It's called the CARES Act. It's called these stimulus. We're helping. And yet, what's the end result? All of the feel-good, lovey-dovey, see, we're helping poor people. And what happened? Well, not just through currency devaluation, but through a bunch of other means, because it turns out when you tell people you can't work and you can't subsist on your own, so we have to lock you down, but don't worry, we'll take care of you. Governments historically end up then taking care of the people that make those governments, and the specific people in those governments have power. So the people that have the ability to lobby or things like that, they end up getting access to greater amounts of this money. Just a quick example, my wife works at a bank. I live in a town called Clarion, Pennsylvania. Do you know how many small businesses walked into her bank and said, we have no idea how to apply for this loan? I brought this up in a debate with Destiny, and he laughed and said that can't be true. Of course it's true. The average person doesn't know how to get these programs, but you know who did get the programs? Every corporation. They knew exactly how to get as much out of government, devaluing, government loans, government stimulus, grants. So yeah, that's my take.
A good example is that I always give to people is that the first stimulus deal or the stimulus package to pass gave United Airlines, I think it was almost $70 billion, right? Yep. And then they have 90,000 employees. That amount of money was enough to give every single one of their employees a $600,000 lump sum, okay? And you know what they did? They fired 20,000 employees and laid off another 10,000. That's what they did with that money. So just like who's really benefiting? There's a reason Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and all of these tech execs, all of the people who own Google and Twitter, et cetera, these are the richest people in American society now. It's because the largest wealth transfer in the history of America just took place. And commies will sit here and use it to justify them voting for Democrats when it's like, we basically have I'm going to be honest. I think we have a uniparty that just passes whatever the rich, corporations want, right? Whatever. If Jeff Bezos wants something, he gets it, right?
You know what I think? What I really think, a big problem about today, and I'm sure LCTRfan and probably Rob too, are going to be able to get with this idea, right? A lot of the younger generation did not grow up and watch the movie along the way called Old Yeller, right?
Excuse me, I watched Old Yeller.
You watched Old Yeller, okay. So, but I do feel like that a lot of people on the left, they have not seen Old Yeller, right? And sometimes you have to do the greater good, even though it's going to be horrible. And I think that in a lot of cases, one, they don't understand what that is. They would look at the situation and go, "Oh, well, Old Yeller's alive. Just leave him be." You know what I mean? Or we can put him in this pen and he'll be all right. He'll be able to live out his days. You know what I mean? Regardless of the fact that he's suffering, right? Old Yeller was not himself. He definitely would not have been able to be Old Yeller in any of the capacity that Old Yeller would have been able to be in, taking down the bull, for example. He wouldn't have been able to do that. I think a Democrat would have just tried to keep him there in the pen and just, eventually end up getting bit by the very thing that they were trying to protect. I just feel like a lot of their policies are just kind of like that.
Yeah, I agree.
So there's a question. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I agree. What one of the things that you said, Rob, I agree with, and the another way that it like really benefits the wealthy, and hurts the poor when we pass these huge stimulus packages and we have easy money policies from the Fed with all the quantitative easing and stuff, is that we're seeing massive rises in asset valuations of real estate and stocks. So if you own real estate, if you own stocks, you're doing awesome right now. I mean, look at the stock market's at record levels. I mean, how absurd is that? That the stock market is at record levels and that the real estate market's out of control. I know I'm literally trying to buy a house like around this time, and it's just insanity. The real estate prices are going up 15% a year in some places, 20% a year in some places, and the real estate values are out of control all around the country, and stock prices are out of control all around the country. And most of what the federal government's doing, from the Federal Reserve to Congress, is designed to prop up this real estate values and the stock prices. And yeah, there's actually a lot of Americans that own real estate and own stocks, but it's not like, the poorest of the poor that are owning real estate and owning stocks. And so we're doing all of this stuff to prop up asset prices in the real estate and the equity sector. And at the same time, we're putting out this massive amounts of debt that at some point is going to have and frankly, it's already, what this data shows is actually the higher debt levels that you have, the lower economic growth you have. So if you actually look over history, one of the reasons that we no longer have rising wages for the lower income brackets, and one of the reasons that we don't have GDP growth, is because of the constantly expanding size and scope of the federal government and the constantly expanding debt levels. And so what CTV was saying is absolutely right. Like, sometimes it is, to do the right thing, it is going to be painful in the short term. And so if we were to balance the budget, if we were to instantly balance the budget, that would cause a lot of pain. Obviously, if we were to instantly get rid of Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, that would cause a lot of pain. But like, that's why you would do it. That's why in order to do these types of things, you have to do it over time and sort of like a transition period. Like, I think Social Security should be phased out over time. Like, I don't think it's fair, to just yank Social Security, from people that are reliant on it. But I do think it's right that we should start phasing it out over time, and over a longer period of time, you can actually sort of phase that out. And same with Medicare and Medicaid and all of these different things, and get the balance the budget closer to where we're going, because in the long term, we're going to be much better off. It's going to cause GDP growth to go up. It'll cause wage growth to increase. It'll be better for everybody. But because there's a little tiny bit of short-term pain associated with it, well, it's like political. It's like the political third rail.
Yeah, and like I always think it's funny when you could really get into someone's ideology, because again, many of the people that I've talked with on the left, whether it be on panels or elsewhere, right, they claim to be champions of the poorest people. But then look how quickly they flip it when it goes against a position that they find themselves advocating. So my favorite example is illegal immigration. You have a discussion with someone, it'll go something like this. They'll say, they give two justifications for illegal immigration. One, it's morally the right thing to do. Who are we to tell people they can't come in? And second, it keeps your products cheaper, right? Like, you don't want to pay a bunch of money for avocados, right? They're working at a cheap wage. And I'm like, so wait a minute, you're saying so you could have cheap groceries? These people have to work these shitty jobs and not get paid a fair wage. It's an artificial low wage because they're more competitive because they don't have to meet the regulations we put on the rest of people. Oh, no. We should pay them more. Well, then wouldn't the price go up of the produce, the very thing you're saying? And when you're having this discussion, one of the things that the evidence is quite clear on is that illegal immigration, particularly from the southern border, competes directly with low-skilled labor. And where they settle is predominantly in cities. So they are directly competing with people of color in cities that have low-skilled labor, right? And when you bring this up almost every time, you know what the answer I'm giving is? Yeah, but it increases GDP. And it's like, you're making the argument of the people you claim to hate the most. You're saying, well, as long as the bottom line is more money for the country, people at the bottom scale now have increased competition right when it comes to their wages.
I'll just say that, I mean, obviously I have a very different perspective than LCTRfan.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's mostly generational, actually, but I don't really see GDP growth or economic growth necessarily as tied to the country's well-being, especially when more people, commit suicide. There's more people addicted to drugs. More people, less people own stocks than they used to. Less people own houses than they used to. Less people are staying in the same communities that they used to stay in, meaning that there is no communities being built up. We're all transient economic inputs into a machine. I am not particularly married to capitalism, but I understand that it is the system that we have, and I'm not going to work to upend the system during a time of international crisis. I am, to be frank, terrified that China is going to eat our lunch, even though Joe Biden, is pretending that they're not going to. And this is actually something that you mentioned in regards to consumer goods. People, it's institutions like the Cato Institute who will come out and defend trade with China, despite the fact that they've gotten worse on human rights abuses. They're now committing more atrocities than they used to. They have not gotten better. They've infected international liberal institutions and are using them for their own policy agenda now, things like the UN and et cetera. And so, like, you have to look at it like this. The argument that the people from the Cato Institute will use is like, well, Americans are saving $200 a year on TVs and phones. And I'm like, I don't care. I don't care if Americans are saving $100 or $200 a year on their phones or their TVs while we're propping up the most authoritarian regime on this planet that's engaging in genocide right now. I really don't care. We can pay an extra $100 to $200 so we're not giving money to modern day Nazis. That'd be great. And frankly, the people there who are doing the labor, it's basically slave labor. They have literal work camps. They just put 500,000 Tibetans in camps. Like, it's just insane to me.
Well, I don't disagree with any of that, really. I mean, I can talk pure economics and pure finances all day long.
Okay, before we get too far, because
I was gonna say, like, I actually think that the economics and the finance stuff is actually secondary to social issues. So I don't disagree with that at all. I mean, I can talk about economics and finance and keep it that way and keep it within that realm of possibility or just that realm of discussion. But I actually think it is somewhat irrelevant compared to sort of societal well-being. And I think, that is all downstream from culture and social values. And I don't think it's worthwhile at all if you've got a rotten society and a rotten culture and with a rotten spiritual life to all of a sudden have this booming economy. I think the social structure and fabric comes first, because if you don't have, and frankly, I think one of the reasons we have all these terrible economics is because the social rot came first. When you have this social rot and you have the spiritual rot and you have a turning away from family values and conservative, values and a strong community life and a strong religious life, you then turn to government to replace all of that with it. And that's one of the fundamental tenets of, I would say, modern American conservatism is a recognition that the reason communists always ban religion is because communists have to get rid of religion so that people then replace their religious beliefs and they get their spiritual fulfillment from the government and from communism. So I don't disagree that, economics is not the end all be all. I'm a very, very clear social conservative, and I think that's the first and foremost sort of thing that comes first, because politics is downstream from culture.
I agree.
So
it's just I come to a conclusion on economics because of that. I think to myself, okay, how do you get conservative culture? And are you going to have a spiritual revival that comes naturally in a time where you have instant access to whatever pleasures you want? It's never been cheaper to be a hedonist. It's never been more accessible to be a bad person. It's never been so easy to be a bad person in human history, ever, because of the things that are available to us, in large part because, well, that's just the way the market works. The market wants to make it as easy as possible for Karen to purchase her dildo and get it delivered to her house via drone in 2 hours. That's just market efficiency.
It's not the market, though. It's
hot take.
The people in the market.
Before we get too far away from it, I got a hot take.
What's up?
All right, so here's the hot take. You ready? Because the economy, I feel like it's one of those long-term things, like LCTRfan was talking about, right? Like it's going to take a while in order to get this thing fixed, and that's where, in my mind, I kind of made the argument for this may be one of those times in history where we need to actually look at removing the term limits from the office of the president, and then, and I think we all agree that there definitely needs to be term limits placed on the House and the Senate, right? So that's where I think that if we're going to do one, we're going to need to do the other, because if we're going to try to hold the system that we have together, the rot that's inside the legislatures has got to get cleared out so that real work can get done. And then if we're going to try to get away from the fiat currency and back into a more stable system where we're not just perpetually running debt, then we're going to need an executive that's going to be able to help guide that in that arena. Does that make sense?
I don't think any kind of structural changes or constitutional changes to term limits is going to fix what we. The root problem in the United States of America is that we have turned to we're rotten spiritually, and that's not the fault of the free market. That's not the fault of the constitutional structure. That's the fault of the American people. Each individual American choosing to turn away from a godly life. And then you have an entire nation that goes, I mean, look at all of our problems in this country have basically come about ever since the 1960s sexual revolution.
I wouldn't say that.
I don't know, but
I wouldn't say that. I think it was breaking down way before that, because I mean, otherwise there wouldn't have been an argument for prohibition in the 20s when lots of wives got mad at their husbands and brothers, and everybody was drunk all the time. So that's, you know what I mean? So
no, it was breaking down before that. I'll give you that.
I'm not I'm not ascribing the problems necessarily to the system, right? There's all sorts of problems with different systems. A lot of these stem from government, right? So if a policy implemented keeps somebody impoverished and they live in the inner city, ultimately their cultural values are not going to be that great. That's just what's going to happen. If you're impoverished, you live in the inner city, let's say you don't have a father or whatever, you don't have a father figure in your life, you're probably more likely to commit crime, you're more likely to engage in violent action, you're more likely to have a lower life satisfaction rates, you're less likely to be religious. I am just saying that there has never been a time in human history where it has been so accessible to be a person who engages in behavior that creates necessarily not necessarily evil people, but people who engage in bad behavior, right? If I can open a new tab right now as I'm talking to you and get a dopamine hit by looking at pornography, and we know that 80% of men are looking at pornography, that's something that's very concerning, and that's something that's incentivized through markets that we've made legal. We've said it's okay for you to sell sex to everybody for ad revenue on the internet. That's something that we created via capitalism. And I don't think that that's good for society.
Yeah, but that's more a result of social policy at the governmental level, because like the government has implemented moral laws, throughout human history. Look at incest laws. Incest laws have at their root a belief in morality, and that it's the government's job to have laws that actually promote a moral and a just society. And so if a government could ban pornography, or a government could ban incest, that really doesn't say anything about the economics that the country has or anything else. That just has to do with where's the country at socially and culturally, and what laws are they putting into place. That's sort of different, I think, from it's not, I mean, it's different from what like economics and taxing and spending. It obviously impacts it, and it leads to more taxing and spending and bigger government and everything else, because people naturally turn to it. But I think they're, in terms of what's causing it, those are somewhat, I think, distinct.
But to me, I think you said it earlier, where politics is downstream of culture, right? Like, so it's hard to legislate our way out of this. Like at this point, let's say tomorrow the government just passes, a law that's like porn's illegal. Like, it's not going to solve the situation, because the underlying rot that allowed people to search for that would still exist. Now, you might say it would be a step in the right direction, But I think that the problem is culture, and the problem is, maybe I'm more conspiratorial. I feel that culture has been dominated by these people in positions of power in the uniparty establishment, and that they're damn smart at what they're doing. They know exactly how to influence people in ways cause division that lead to people making poor choices. Because, like Endernax said earlier, I think that a lot of these people, they look at themselves as a different species almost. For me, they want a return to neo-feudalism, right? They want. It was ironic. We're talking about Rome. That's what they want, bread and circuses. They don't want people to be self-reliant. They don't want people to have a moral strength of character and to be able to basically employ themselves or have a small business or that. Like LCTRfan, you were talking about communists. Look what's going on under COVID in the United States. We have a Supreme Court that in Nevada said you can't go to church, but you can go to the casino. You can't go to church in New Jersey, but you can go to the liquor store, right? Why are they attacking the religion? Well, that's exactly it. Because you could have no God. The bargain they're offering you is this: we will be your perpetual mother and father. We'll take care of you, but don't you ever criticize us. You worship us. That's what they've done with culture, as far as I'm concerned, with kind of like the adornment of celebrity, the way we see it, just kind of all of this terrible.
Okay,
stuff
let me
that we
ask
see
you.
going on. To me,
let me ask you
not an
this then.
accident. Sorry.
Let me ask you this then. Because I'm not saying that we can legislate our way out of this. Maybe Endernax is saying you can legislate your way out of it. I think of like legislation as more of a reflection of where the country is at. So instead of like thinking of, oh, let's legislate and have the government ban incest, therefore that'll make the society more moral. I think of it as, okay, we are a society that doesn't believe in incest, so we are going to ban incest. And so I think of the legislation part of it as more of a reflection of where it's coming. But my question, I guess, for you is, how do you what's your solution then to that problem?
I mean, this
either, yeah, or both you guys, or CTV too.
I think you can legislate it. And the reason I think you can is because I think that even though there are people who are really struggling to act morally and act upright and be good people, that a lot of those people realize that what they're doing is like empty and that it's not very fulfilling, that there's obviously something missing. And I don't know that feeling in and of itself will result in a spiritual revival. I don't actually have much hope in that. I know there's a lot of people who just want to like leave it to God, but I think there's scripture on like, it's actually the virtuous man who has to, do the good works in order to make society and his community better. And you can't just sit there and rely on God to be the answer for everything. Sometimes it takes a virtuous man acting in the will of God, or through God, through the scripture, to do the right things. I don't necessarily think that using the government to do things is inherently bad. I think that there are a lot of bad government policy that has bureaucracy and all sorts of problems attached to it. And there's all sorts of reasons why that happens. My solution to this looks like incentivizing people to live in rural and conservative communities and return to a way of life that was almost globalization. And I'm not using that term in a type of dog whistly way. What I literally mean is that as we introduced liberal international capitalism to the entire world and engaged in markets everywhere, we dug out the industrial base from small town America, from these medium towns, from some of the cities in inner America. These places were essentially bastions of conservative culture. It was these places where people had their families. They lived on farms. They lived in these rural townships. And now we're like, oh, you want a job? You want a good paying job? Well, guess what, kids? If you want that and you're going to go guess what? You're going to get this college degree. Now you're going to have to move to Denver or Salt Lake City or San Francisco or LA or Dallas, Texas or Houston. And even in those conservative states that I named, like Salt Lake City. Well, Salt Lake City is still a liberal city inside of a conservative state. And the culture inside of it, despite having a lot of Mormons around it, is not a great one. That's got a party culture, a lot of people engaging in behavior that's not great. So how do you solve it? Well, for me, it looks like making it easier. And I don't know that you can reshuffle jobs that easily and without insane government bureaucracy. So I'm not in favor of any type of jobs program from the government. I think you get rid of welfare and you institute a UBI. People will naturally gravitate towards where it's cheaper to live, because then they even if they're taking a loss insofar as their income at their job, it's more affordable. They can say, oh, listen, it's more affordable over here. Some of my income's not attached to my labor. I can get a cheaper paying job here and live in this rural community. Whereas right now, a lot of young people feel like they're forced into a city because they can't find jobs. And I'm feeling the pressure right now. My fiance is feeling the pressure. Every young person I know is either working a crappy job in a rural town or working at a gas station or something, or they're moving to a city to get their high paying job. And that doesn't make a good culture, right? People are molded by their environment.
All right,
So,
Rob.
like, I have a lot of problems when it comes, like, I extremely value freedom, and I have a lot of problems. I understand that there is a place for laws and restricting freedom when it's for the public utility, but I'm very hesitant to have the government step in and sort of legislate morality. I understand that's not what Endernax is saying, but to me, that apprehension comes from, I think that the approach needs to start with us as the individual first. Let me say real quick to what Endernax is saying. One thing that I think is, I agree with what you're saying about city living and things like that. One of the ironies through the government's greed to obtain power during COVID, regardless if they're just exploiting an actual situation or if they're inflating the situation for the exploitation. One of the things that they should be careful of is this. Don't you see that people are starting to realize, I don't necessarily have to be in the city for this job anymore, right? You're starting to see it. The more people, it's a bad thing in one sense that we're not meeting in person as much as we used to, but it's accelerating something that was going to happen anyways. And that is when we have a more connected, through technology, we're more connected, whether it be you could literally travel faster because of advances in transportation technology, or because of communication technology, you're able to communicate and do these jobs in a remote setting. I am hopeful that the cities are going to start to really lose their appeal. You're going to see people saying, you know what? I could work for this corporation and I only have to go into the office one day a week, right? And I could work from home these other days. Or I could have a satellite office that's, instead of paying a ridiculous rent for my law firm to be in downtown Boston, I could be out, 30 minutes into the suburbs or 2 hours out in rural America, and I could still have that office and don't have to pay the ridiculous rents. And I think that Endernax is right, that itself, if we see more of this exodus of kind of focus on cities, I think that will help out a lot with this. The only advice I have, it sounds cliche and it sounds cheesy, but to me, it's this, my religion is this. I just believe in being Christ-like. That's it. I can't recite to you scripture. I don't have a particular domination. I just have an image of who Christ was. I say, that's who I should model my life on. And I fail every day. But to me, that's my constant effort. That's where I should go. If you get to being Christ-like because of some other way, right? You're, believe in Judaism or you're a Muslim. I don't care. If your character is one that I could say, yeah, that's a good character. That's what I would call Christ-like. I don't care how you get there. I think following Christ is the easiest way to get there. But so for me, the reason I believe this, I went to a church. The church was terrible. They were Pentecostal, so not only they spoke in tongues, I asked questions about it. They basically told me to shove off. They didn't want to talk about it. And they used fear as the reason to be in the church. I didn't like it, so I became disenfranchised. And you know what it took? It wasn't some church. It was people I knew that identified as Christians that I could look at, not because they were preaching to me, but because the way they lived their life, I was like, wow, that person's awesome. They're kind to me, even though I don't agree with what their religion is. The way they purported themselves made me change my mind. It wasn't anything they said to me. It was how they lived their life. And so what I try to tell people is, the establishment right now and the culture is dominated by people that are against conservatism and against the values that the best thing you could do to fight back is you will not by just your words, but by your actions. We are good people. Our values matter. This is the best way to put a society together. And you don't show that by being arrogant and screaming at people that disagree with you, which I fail at all the time. But it's through those actions. Whatever you do, if you're a true capitalist, right, you have a specialization. Maybe you're a carpenter. You could do things through your work and how you purport yourself in life. I think that will come a long way to putting our society in a better place. So I don't know.
No, I agree with that.
We can talk.
No, I agree.
That's where I think it needs to start.
No, I agree. I think I agree with a lot of that. I think the only real genuine way our country will be saved is if there is a bottom up, grassroots, individual based spiritual revival and religious reawakening in this country, and it only happens at the individual level. This is not something that can be engineered from the top down. This is not something that can happen other than on an individual basis. I think, frankly, focusing, one of the things that I came to realize eventually for my own mental well-being and is that I don't control national politics. I can have very little say over what happens with our national politics scene. What I can control is how I interact with people on my own daily basis, how I treat my friends, how much of a family man I am. And so those are the things that we can control, and those are the things that we can focus on. And so I think that's a good way to go. And frankly, it's one of the reasons that I try to, when I go on these Twitch panels, I don't call people names. I'm respectful and kind to people. I can't tell you how many messages I get. If you actually could see my Twitter notifications and YouTube notifications and comments on Twitch, I get nonstop messages about people saying, "Wow, LCTRfan, I don't know how you do it. How do you go on those on those things?" And people are so rude to you. People are so toxic to you, calling you the worst of the worst things, and you don't respond in kind. And so I take that. I take that as a huge compliment because I try really hard not to treat people poorly like that. And the way that these leftists on Twitch treat people, it's truly just shocking and disgusting. The name calling and the disrespect and mean spirited, like truly mean spirited stuff. It's really nasty.
Yeah.
And the other time I got really fired up. Oh, sorry, Kurt.
Yeah, because I see exactly what you guys are talking about. I felt like that the church lost the game whenever they started allowing the government to fix some of the problems inside their communities where they should have been stepping up back in the day, right? I feel like the church has gotten distracted over the last few, decades to be sure, if not the last century or two, right?
What was the church supposed to do, like during the Great Depression, just as an example? Like they already were working at capacity. If you look at church history back then, that was where people were, when people were literally starving to death during the Great Depression, they were the number one giver of aid, right? It wasn't like the church disappeared, and it's not like the church is gone now. I mean, the biggest food banks in my town are all churches. They're all religious institutions. And I'm not saying they're still here helping. The issue is that, okay, they're helping, but to what extent are people actually involved in those communities? Church attendance is dwindling. People don't identify. They're identifying as more often as secular. So
right. So it's not the goodwill stuff that they're, it's more about, right, them using, like, for instance, if you go into any church and you mention the drug war, right, they're going to automatically go to these things need to be illegal. And they won't even stop and do the common sense think of, like me and Rob, the drunken debates where we pointed out, like, they were like, yes, I'm for the Constitution. It's like, all right, then let me walk you through this process, right? And then they're like, well, no, we still need to make it illegal federally. And it's like, come on, man. Like, Christians in the country, it doesn't seem like slow down enough in their personal, like, how they would, like, if crack was fucking legalized tomorrow, I'm not going to go do it, right? Just because I know crack is a bad idea, right? But and that right there is the point when it comes to principle, and it should be the principle for Christians, is to hate the sin but not the sinner. And then when they make these things illegal, ultimately they're punishing the people, right? You can't.
I don't know how well you want to. I don't know. I think I disagree with you. Because I think that it's to have cocaine and to have opiates widely available to people, because ultimately you making it legal will mean more people will be addicted, and we're going to have even more deaths of despair, even more. Like, these drugs are not good.
Did you see Breaking Bad?
Yes, I have seen Breaking Bad.
Okay, so you saw then, and it took you through the history there of meth, right? How back in the 70s it was made in such a way to where it was blue, right, rather than white, because of the ingredients that were being used, right? And that how the blue kind was actually a little bit safer than the white kind, right? So here's reality. Just check it here for a minute, right? Because the government made that illegal, then the market is now trying to get around the government, which it's going to every single time, right? Trying to attack it in that way is only going to cause the problem to move around. This is where you got to have some type of military tactician strategic mindset, which like, what's the problem here? Right, the problem is that people are making
state on your southern border might help, but I don't know.
Here's where I disagree with you a little bit.
The users are being exploited, right? So we've got to be able to educate people ahead of time that these things and what they're going to do to them, and to hopefully have the community around the people that are learning this stuff to be supportive in that way. Well, a church is a great way to do that. Right? And I feel like that in a lot of churches, they get stuck into this is the church house, this is where we meet, and then they don't branch out into their communities just to like walk around and check on people. You know what I mean?
The only thing, yeah, I don't think it's fair to blame. I mean, we're talking about how did we get to such spiritual rot and cultural rot in the country, and it's not the church's fault. It's like everybody's got an experience about a Christian or a church that wronged them or were hypocritical or everything like that. It's not their fault. The person, if you're an American, and you have no relationship with God, and you are getting your spiritual fulfillment from the government and from all this other cultural rot that we have in this country, it's your fault. It's nobody else's fault. And so that's why this is all about on an individual basis. And so, I mean, everybody could say a comment about, a church that wronged them or something, but it's not the church's fault that we got into this situation. It's the individuals that have chosen to move to the government to try to get their spiritual fulfillment.
Let me ask you this. Who was it that you think was probably a large part of the voting bloc in order to get the war on drugs started?
That was bipartisan. I mean, that was almost all Americans supported that.
LCTRfan, be fair. You know that the Christian conservatives, right, were lining up to sign that bill because when I grew up, right, I was towing that line of the drug war, every single bit of it, because I saw my mom basically go through her whole life addicted to some kind of damn pain pill. Yeah, I mean, I can tell you stories, man. Right?
Well, the drug war, I think the drug war is a little bit different, though, than what we're talking about here, in my opinion. I think and we can debate the drug war, but you can, just blaming, we're talking about why is our country so spiritually rotten and culturally rotten, and how are we going to get there, and you're blaming the drug war on the churches. There's no connection there. That's not the fault.
That's why then allow me, right, to clarify, right? Okay. So what I'm talking about is like when I was growing up, I went to church on Sunday. Like we had planned events where we would go out into the community to do different things with different people, right? Like sometimes we would, there was a wood shop class that was being held at another church, you know what I mean? And different things in the community. So we kind of got around and got to know people and obviously had food banks and these things set up for the community. And what I've seen as I've traveled around the country and a lot, especially around the cities, right? And maybe that's where I need to be a little bit more specific, is in and around the cities. I feel like there's a hell of a lot, like there's just not as much community outreach to find out what's going on with the people inside of the communities. Because I mean, like a city block could really hold like what, 500,000, crazy amount of people. So
there's a psychological like phenomena that's been observed for the last 100 years in psychology, and it's I forget what it's called. The concept is essentially that you can only care about so many people, and the hard limit's like 1,000 people that you actually care about. And it's not that you don't care about other people. It's just that when you're thinking of helping individuals, when you're thinking of actively doing something or engaging with somebody, or you know their first name, or you have some sort of kinship with them, there's a certain extent where you just get stuck. And when you start talking about cities, if there aren't enough churches, if there aren't enough people who are living their faith, you really do get stuck because there's too many people. If you're talking about a small town with 5,000 people, 10,000 people, 15,000 people, right? That's actually more of in my opinion, a city, but whatever, 2,000 people, 1,000 people. Okay. Like it's going to be pretty easy for you as a church community, as 50 people, to know everybody and to help everybody. But in a city, the problem gets so magnified because you're stacking people up into these little cubicles. It's no wonder they aren't conservative. It's no wonder they don't have good, quote unquote, cultural values. It's no wonder they don't care about each other. They're rats in a cage.
Yeah, what I would like to know, I think it'd be a really interesting like study or think piece or something to really dig deep into why is it that cities and humans living in cities turns so bad and people get so negative and it destroys community and it destroys mental health and people become depressed and more drug use, and what is it really about cities that are so terrible to the human spirit?
Well, I can say
I don't always blame it on too many faces, because you just become another person in a sea of people and you're uncaring. Like if I'm walking down the street in my small town and 2,000 people, I know the weird guy's name who's walking, even the weird guy, like I know who he is. And you know what everybody does? Hey, good to see you. If you don't wave, you're a dick. If you don't wave, you're an asshole. Like, nobody's
That's
gonna
where
like
I live too.
Yeah,
that's the way it is where I'm at. And
if you wave at somebody,
look,
like they'll eyeball you. Like you want to go? Like you want to fight? That's what they'll do.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe it's something like evolutionarily, right? Maybe there's something that has to do with like an unconscious perception of scarcity of resources when so many people are around. I don't know. I do know this. They've done studies like with they'll put someone that looks homeless unconscious on the sidewalk. They'll put them in a suburban or rural community, and almost immediately someone will stop. Are you okay? And of course, this happens more in cities, but it's appalling. People just step over them, right? Like when I go to the look, I hate to even talk about this stuff because I'm not trying to brag, and by no means am I a better person than anyone else. But I remember like the first time I live an hour and a half northeast of Pittsburgh. So like in 6th grade, there's a science center in Pittsburgh called the Carnegie Science Center. So my mom gives me like $20 and sends me off to the science center with my school, and there's a gift shop there. And I gave my $20 to the first homeless person I saw. I'd never seen a homeless person. And someone who was just in 6th grade, I was like, this is terrible. What happened with this guy? How's he here? What happened? And that's still how I feel when I go out in the city. Now, even me, though, you get more jaded to it. What are you going to do? Give $20 to every homeless person you see? Well, I'm someone who makes $15 an hour. I don't have the resource. So then you think, well, do I give it to anyone? To everyone? Do I give it to everyone? So maybe there's some of that psychology that's going into it. But yeah, I mean, I don't just like Endernax. You're absolutely right. Where I live, it's like everybody knows everyone. And it's the type of community where, this is just a story. I used to bartend. My dad's still a bartender. It's at an Eagles club. It's kind of like a Moose club or something like that. There's a guy. Hopefully this person's not watching because I don't mean anything ill by this, but there was a guy whose house burned down. Pretty much just a drunk, right? Like it's like, and everybody knew if you give this guy money, he's probably gonna fetter it away. But you know what happened? The community came together and they literally got money. A broke community, everyone broke, and they pulled together thousands of dollars to help this guy out. This wasn't someone with a great reputation. This was, hey, someone need to help them out in this community, and that's just lost. I always, if you're wondering like what I'm talking about, go back and watch Crocodile Dundee. Right? There's this scene where he first gets to New York, where he's like, "G'day, g'day," and he's waving to everyone, and they're just like flipping him off and stuff, and he doesn't get it, right? To him, it's like he's talking to the first guy. He's like, "I'm going to be in town for a while. Maybe I'll see you about." And the guy's just like, "What? What are you talking about?" But where he came from, that's how you interact with people. You know everyone's name. Kind of, you're there to help them. They're a person. When you're in New York, everyone's fake. You're a person. And so, there's something psychologically about that. I don't know how to fix it. I hope that, there's a transition that goes to more suburban and rural areas, but it's tragic.
There used to be culture in cities, and it was like these it would be like Italian ghettos, or it'd be like these the Hungarian ghetto or whatever. Ghetto, I'm using the term ghetto loosely. I don't mean it as like economically depraved area. But the reason it would be like that is because you would have all of these different family units who immigrated from all these different places, and they would live in the same city block, in the same building for generations and generations, and to the point where your grandma's upstairs and your family's there and your son just bought the place downstairs. That doesn't really exist anymore in cities, and you've seen a moving away from this style. Instead, maybe you're moving every 5 years. Maybe you're moving every 10 years. That's the normal story for a lot of American families. So how can you become attached to people when you're constantly moving around? You don't care about anybody.
And that's a lot
And
got
look,
to do with
what-
like the effects that the war on drug had with removing a lot of people out of society as well. I mean, we have what is like 4 million people locked up here in this country, and I don't even know what I know. There's a delineation between violent and nonviolent, right? But it's quite a bit of people. So then, and then also with the economic side of things, we have people having less and less kids. The more physically responsible that someone is, the less children they decide to have, right? And then the individuals that can get government assistance end up having more kids because now it becomes an incentive. So, like, how LCTRfan, you're the oldest here, I think, right? So old man, tell me how we're supposed to fix this.
I don't know. I was gonna say one of the things I think it might be is sort of a disconnect from nature, honestly, because I don't know if you guys have seen a lot of studies coming out recently about how they say if you spend at least 2 hours in nature a week, your like levels of mental health and levels of happiness are like way high. And I mean, just for me personally, like I lived in Miami for 3 years. And growing up in small town Montana, I went camping all the time, and we'd go hiking, and I'd ride my bike down to the river and swim in the river and float the rivers on the, and so then to live in a city like Miami for 3 years, I started to even experience sort of like, I stopped putting my grocery cart away, like that's such a small thing, but like in Montana, everybody puts their grocery cart when they're done shopping, they put their grocery cart away. In Miami, nobody did it, and so then like after a year of living there, I stopped doing it, even though it was like really I felt that terrible about it, but it was just like this impact that living in the city had on me. I think part of it might be sort of the disconnect from Mother Nature, because I think there's a reason why all the world's spiritual leaders always go up onto a mountaintop.
What, LCTRfan, I know you're not about to laugh, right? But you're about to laugh at what I'm about to tell you, though, right? Because I was on a panel, right? And they asked me, said, well, CTV, what do you do for your mental health? I said, well, shit. Whenever I feel like I need to get a hold of myself, I go for a walk in the mountains, right?
Hell yeah.
A rural drive for me as well, like hiking, of course, and camping. But like these are just how I clear my headspace.
Yeah, no, it's funny, and conservatives are so much more in touch with nature, and it's funny because the leftists who live in these concrete jungles, they think they care about the environment so much, but it's like, why do all the people that I know that actually are in touch with nature and spend time in the wilderness and stuff are conservatives?
And their solution to the climate crisis is to shove everybody in cities. Like, good idea.
Right. Well, it goes back to, right, like, so one of the things I was going to add, I'm glad you said that, LCTRfan, because I was going to bring that up. But one of the things I was going to add is the more we rely on government for our well-being, the less personal responsibility and charitability we feel the need to have. So you don't care about your neighbor anymore because the government will take care of it, right? I don't have to worry about it. I live in the city. There's some bureaucracy somewhere that's going to make sure that person has a meal tonight. I'm going to step over them. I don't care. That doesn't happen in the smaller areas, right? In the more rural and suburban areas where you're actively concerned. What can I do to help? And a great example, right? What you were just talking about with spending time in nature. One of the lessons I learned early in life is if you're going to do good deeds, you don't announce that you're doing good deeds, right? Like, so, I remember my parents, after Thanksgiving after church one time, and my parents, by no means, you'd look at them, they're not like overly like what you consider overly like church going people. Like they curse and swear. But I love them. They're great people. We went and we picked up like $100 worth of groceries and we dropped them off on someone's porch step. And I was like, oh, I can't wait to tell him. He'll be so happy. And my dad was like, don't you say a word. The point of leaving this food wasn't so they think, wow, you're a good person. The point was to help them. That's it. Don't tell anyone. Right? That's it. And like that was an important lesson to me. So one of the things I find it ironic, all of these leftists talk about like saving the earth and saving the environment. You know who I see out there actually doing physical things to help the environment? Hunters, farmers where I live, people, because they value that resource. They understand. Everyone I know, if they don't get a deer in hunting season, they're struggling to feed their family throughout the winter. It's just the truth. And if you don't get a deer, I guarantee your neighbor gives you part of theirs. Guaranteed. That's the way it works. Those people care about the environment. They understand what nature is and the importance of trying to do your best. Now that doesn't mean that, to them it's a literally bottom up approach, as opposed to this, well, if we just got rid of all fossil fuels, everything would be fine. That's not reality. And this utopian approach that we see that's occurring on the left, oftentimes in the name of solving the big harm of climate change, there's actual real things we could be doing, like with your forest right in your town, or in Flint, Michigan with the drinking water. All of that gets overlooked in the name of, well, we got to solve climate change. It's climate change. And yeah, I always thought that was ironic. These people aren't announcing it. You might not know it, but if you want like names of groups, look at like someone like Ducks Unlimited. It's kind of a hunting organization. Look at the great work they do with the environment. Tons of hunter groups that do this awesome work, mostly conservative, but they have a political bent to do it. Yet they don't get the praise. Instead, we look at people like John Kerry jet setting around on airplanes using more fossil fuel in one day than I'll use in a year, and he's supposed to be the person we look at as taking care of the environment.
No, to jump off that, one of the worst things about using the government and supporting government as your way of doing charity, and it takes away the fulfillment that a person gets from helping somebody. And so if you actually go and help somebody personally, your neighbor or somebody else, that's a very fulfilling experience for a person to do that and help somebody and give them money or do work for them, physical work, do whatever it is. If all you do is, I just support higher taxes on other people, and I want the government to take money from somebody else and give it to somebody else, and that's my charity, that's the charity work I do, that totally robs the transaction of all of the benefits that it gives to both people, and it removes a lot of the other benefits to actually helping people with responsibility and follow up and all these other things. And so it's almost like this, reinforcing circle where, this disconnect from other humans and this anti-human mentality where let's just have the government take care of the poor people, that way I don't have to take care of the poor people. That just causes more and more of this sort of disconnect from our neighbors and harms us of all the benefits that we really get from both the giver and the receiver of when you do personal charity, in-person charity.
I'm glad you said that, because I'm going to be honest with you. One of the things that I've struggled with since I've started streaming is that whenever somebody's donating bits or subbing and stuff like that, and I'm starting to get a little bit better about it, but like it's a really humbling thing for me, and I don't always know how to react to it. So I'm going to be honest with you, like watching your reactions is kind of helping me, like, because it's a two-way street in that, and then I don't know how to react because I've been more about just doing things for myself and not having to interact with a lot of people because of the experiences that I've had, right? So like now getting out here in the community, and when that happens, my reaction to it says a lot, and I'm just trying to get a little bit better, I guess more gracious. It's not like I'm not, you know what I mean? Like,
there's nobody more thankful than I am for 100 bits.
You know what I'm saying though, right? Because it's hard. Like, I'm not used to that. I've never worked as a stripper, for example, right? So
well, the mere fact that you think that you worry about it shows that you're probably a better person than most. That's just like gimme. I feel the same way.
I cried the first time I got a sub on Twitch. I'm not gonna lie to you. Okay, I felt like I didn't deserve it. This was like the first. This was before I was ever even thinking about doing politics on Twitch. I did a video game stream to like 10 viewers back in, I don't even know. It was like 2017, and I have my small little community, and I just got affiliate and somebody subscribed, and I sat there and I cried on stream like an idiot because I was like, I don't deserve this, but like it's just $2. It's $2, okay? But like it
means something, man. I'm with you. Yeah. So to bring it back around to a minute ago, though, right? Rob, you're talking about the bottom up approach, right? So here's remember what that trophic cascade video? I feel like they don't understand like how nature works with that regard, right? And it's funny that while they will sit there and agree that the human beings are the apex predators of the planet, right, without a doubt, everything competes with us. There's not even a question, right? But they don't also at the same time understand what the role of the apex predator would be in a natural environment like that, as far as trying to control populations of not only the other predators in the area, but also the creatures that are dependent upon them. You know what I mean? So it's really like, for as much as they claim to love nature and want to protect it, right? There's been a few cases where I've been talking to a lefty with regard to, say, like wind turbines, right? And we get to the conclusion of, oh, fuck the birds, right? And I'm like, no, we can't in any case, right? We got to protect the birds. So I'm just going to remain philosophically consistent here. We're going to protect the birds, and because it was like we were going over clean energy with the wind turbines, and then we got over to the Keystone Pipeline and where it was going to be running, and because of some sandhill cranes that would have been affected, that was the reason why. And I was like, you know what? If I don't want these birds getting fucked with, then I don't want these birds getting fucked with either. So we got to figure out how to make it work. And there's so many pipelines running across everywhere anyway. It's like, surely there's a way to be able to, make it work there. So,
I mean, there's a lot of things to say. Yeah, oftentimes in the name of feelings, they'll implement policies that actually is detrimental in reality to the cause they claim to have. Like, for example, shutting down the Keystone Pipeline. They're just going to use older pipelines or build pipelines different that have more leaks and things like that, or they'll send energy through trucking and things it's going to continue. We see there's all sorts of problems. That's the truth. There's almost no policy that exists that's a perfect policy. Like, there's pros and cons to almost everything. And when you simplify it to, well, I'm moral because I want X, then there's often a bunch of bad things, such as, oh, we want wind power. Well, now there's a bunch of people, if it's unreliable, that suffer because of that. And there's other causes of the environment. The best example, glass recycling. When I was in debate in 2004, teams would stand up and say, we need to recycle, and glass would be one of the things. We had a ton of evidence. You know where glass recycling plants normally go? Inner city black neighborhoods. And they're a net increase in emissions. So actually, recycling aluminum at that time in 2004 was actually beneficial. Glass, it actually required more fossil fuels to recycle glass than it did to just create new glass. So in the name of feeling good, you're increasing emissions, and where? Right in these inner city neighborhoods, the people that you claim to know most about. But they didn't care because it made them feel good. The other thing I was going to say, LCTRfan, when you were speaking there, was not only is there this idea, we'll leave the government solve this. Now, I'm not saying there isn't a role for government to be a safety net. I'm not saying that. I'm saying once we rely so heavily on that, we say, we'll just redistribute wealth and take care of everyone, and the idea of personal responsibility and charity goes out the window, we start to see a lot of problems. You see this same problem in what I call woke capitalism, right? The truth is, and I get this from Jordan Peterson, Endernax, how do you define the right and the left? Jordan Peterson defines it as hierarchies are inevitable. And the right says hierarchies are inevitable and they're good. But the left says, yes, but if we don't constantly interrogate them, corrupt people could get at the top of the hierarchy, and we should look out at people at the bottom of the hierarchy. So both are necessary. You need that yin and yang, which I agree with. There is a role for the left. Like, in many ways, like both you and Endernax have been saying, lecture, where we don't just say GDP or be damned. Who cares if we're exploiting slave labor in China? We shouldn't do that. We shouldn't, right? But there's a role for what you would traditionally consider the left. But what happens? They engage in woke capitalism. So there's this postmodernist called Zizek, and he's got this film. It's called A Pervert's Guide to Ideology. And at one part of the film, he's talking about Starbucks. And he's like, here's what these people did. They were like, oh, we feel bad that we're exploiting poor workers in South America. So here's what we'll do. We'll charge an extra $1 for your cup of coffee, and then we promise we'll give it to poor workers in Brazil. And so then the person that's still exploiting that labor has a smile on their face because they're like, I did my part. I paid an extra $1 for my coffee. I'm a good person. And that's the exact opposite. And so we see all of this insane stuff. slave labor in China. Chase Bank, that was criminally investigated for fair communities. They're the only building in Minneapolis that didn't burn down in one city block. Why? Because they hung up a sign that said Black Lives Matter. I mean, it's insanity. The role that we need the left for traditionally, and by the way, I think it's not just the left, because we're green. We're not for capitalism above all else, for exploitation. But where are they? Those people are the ones that are out there right now saying, oh, yeah, we got to support all of these corporations that are defending Black Lives Matter, even if they're using slave labor in China. You could see it in the face of LeBron James, who already he couple shill for the government of China and their incredible inhumane practices. It boggles my mind.
I've noticed, Rob, whenever you move around a lot and your camera has to start working, your sound starts cutting out.
Is that what it is?
Well, you know what it is. It's because business owners and multinationals, right, realize that they don't really care about culture. Actually, they care about making money and accumulating as much power as they possibly can. So you have these people who will go around. They'll change. If they think that the left is the cultural hegemon of the United States, which is very clear, then they'll give to that side. And that's why Joe Biden raised more money from every industry outside of coal and gas than Donald Trump did. For being a dirty capitalist who wants to oppress all the poor people, Donald Trump sure did seem to not get a whole lot of big corporate backing. Traditional business industry and multinationals and all of these different industries all backed Biden. Why is that? Because they don't care about the cultural issues. They'll signal to them all day. They'll give it. They'll let you. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if in 20 years you have mainstream liberals being like, "Yeah, you can have gender reassignment surgery for kids. 8-year-olds can get their gender reassignment surgery, something like that." I wouldn't be surprised if they go that far because they don't care. All they want is the money. The god for these people is their money, is their power. They don't care which party they have to go through to get it. They don't care what culture is in the society because they're not attached. They're not loyal to the United States. They have their investments all over the planet. If the United States economy collapses, they got investments in China, baby. They got positions in the party for all we know.
Right. No, it's absolutely true. And I say this all the time. Like, look, I might disagree with a lot of the progressives on the left, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're terrible people. And I have legitimate real world friends that are progressives, that are Bernie supporters, big Black Lives Matter supporters. And one of the things I told them, I don't necessarily agree with your agenda, but I don't want to say advice, just my take on this is you're making a huge mistake when you're aligning yourself with the people that you would consider the most immoral, right? So when your protest is sponsored by Nike, when every major corporation is like, yeah, you did it, and your entire argument is racist, and pretty much every institution in the system's like, you're right, keep going. Like, you're directing your protest and your anger to Trump supporters. Like, you're going to Appalachia, the people that are also struggling, you're furious at them. You're demanding they reject whiteness or Trumpism needs investigating or this or that. Why don't you look at the people that you claim to be your allies? Because Cicero said this best, right? Like, you can suffer enemies outside your gates, but the ones within are the ones that are really damning. It blows my mind to see these you heard take. You know what the best thing would have been for Black Lives Matter and most of these progressives? For Trump to win. Because at least then their movement would have had steam. Now what's their movement? Joe Biden just milquetoast being like, sure, we'll take care of your issues. I'll give a speech condemning whiteness or something, and then away we go. Back to the way things have always been.
No, it's really going to be bad for them. If they wanted to create a fascist, this is how you do it. You go back to the ineffective policies of the Obama administration, and you go back to, it just milquetoast passing of the torch to one uniparty member back and forth, because that's what you did. Joe Biden is a member of the uniparty. He's been in Washington for 40 plus years. Like, what is this guy going to do? He's going to go in there. For all we know, I still can't get over this. If one of Trump's children had a connection to China as strong as Hunter Biden's connection, we would have heard about it every day for 4 years. But we're not hearing a peep because Hunter Biden, that poor guy, was a drug addict. It's like all of the vices that they use against the opposition, right? They accused Don Jr. of being a drug addict, of being a cocaine addict. All the things that they think are horrible, horrible, horrible for the opposition to do. It's like, oh no, this poor little puppy dog, Hunter Biden. Oh, he was a victim of the Ukrainian gas companies that were paying him, ridiculous salaries to do God knows what.
Well, that's why we're gonna see, and we're seeing the beginnings of it now, in a massive civil war in the Democrat Party. And if you watch the mainstream media right now, what the mainstream media is obsessively talking about is a civil war in the Republican Party, about how there's this huge divide in the Republican Party. And as we all know, whatever they accuse the Republicans of, that's what they have going on. And so there is no divide in the Republican Party. 90 to 95% of all the Republican base all agree with Trump's policies, essentially. So there is no massive divide in the Republican Party. Sure, there's a healthy debate amongst libertarians and conservatives, but that's nothing compared to the Democrat divide and the ultra woke leftist communist socialist versus like the Joe Biden corporate Democrats or whatever. And Joe Biden is like, I can't believe these leftist socialist communists actually supported Joe Biden and like did it with a straight face. Like, are you kidding me? They're gonna have such a civil war.
No. You have to understand, LCTRfan, it's because Donald Trump is an evil fascist who is going to destroy America and kill all the non-white people. Yeah, that's what they believe. That's what they truly believe. Maybe not that hyperbolic, but that's essentially what they'll say. And I always tell them, I'm like, you realize, like, you're too insane to make it out of the city, right? Like, nobody will listen to you outside of your urban environments.
Right,
like, if you were actually reasonable, like, there used to be these types of, like, socialist movements in like the Appalachian Mountains or the Rocky Mountains. There were actual socialists that existed. You know who they were, though? They were like preachers. They were individuals of faith, and they preached like Jesuit Marxism or whatever it was, like some weird quasi ideology. And they go around and they'd be like, you know what? You're getting screwed over, like you're getting fired from the coal mine, whatever it was. Well, we're going to go there and we're going to go to the government. We're going to demand unionization, whatever it was. They can't do that because if they showed up at these miners' doors with their purple hair and their earrings and go, excuse me, can I talk to you about intersectionality and Marxism? They're just going to laugh at their faces. Like,
yep, that's exactly. And it's like you were saying, Endernax, like what they accuse, and you as well, LCTRfan, what they accuse you of is like what they're doing. So I listened to people tell me that Donald Trump was this crazy authoritarian. You remember, like, to me, this was the seminal moment in Trump's presidency, May 31st. Where a bunch of people rioted in D.C. and attacked the White House. And the reality, there's a bunch of like truths that we're not allowed to say out loud. Here's one of the truths. Why was the police reaction different January 6th to May 31st? You want to know why? Because they knew that the leftists would get violent. That's why. Because they've proven it over and over and over again. So it's like, here they come. We know they're going to get violent. They announced that they were going to try to storm the White House. That's what they did. Anyways, after that, Tom Cotton writes an op-ed in the territory, there's some stuff. What was the reaction? One, they called Trump a bunker bitch. And second, they said that would be authoritarianism, right? Now, in the name of fighting authoritarianism, they elect Joe Biden, who puts 25,000 troops in D.C., puts a fence up, razor wire. They're starting a 9/11 style commission to go after Trump support. Everything that they claimed they were fearful of Donald Trump, literally in the first month of Biden's presidency, not only is it occurring, they're cheering it on. They're actively cheering it on.
Wait, you have to understand, there was an insurrection. They almost took over the entire government. Right. And, I don't know about you, but I'm really scared of Al-Qaeda coming out of the woods and taking over the government. That's definitely happening. And even in the most, radical places, the most radical places for both the left and the right, it's the West Coast. It's Oregon and Washington has the highest numbers of leftists, of dangerous leftists, as well as white nationalists. It has the highest white nationalist presence out of any state in the entire union. Okay, this is where they go. This is where they set up their compounds. Okay, even in those states where some of these people supposedly where are they? Where are they? What state? Why haven't they taken over the Oregon government? Why haven't they taken the Washington government? Even the most radical fringe elements of right-wing society have done nothing. That's not because Joe Biden came in and was like, I need the CIA and the NSA to make sure this doesn't happen. That's not what's happening, guys. That's not what's happening. In fact, it's funny. Wasn't there like a leftist who just got arrested for posting something on Facebook? didn't this just happen? Like they're expanding the state apparatus, they're expanding the surveillance state, and they're arresting their own people, and they don't even care. They're still just like partisan hacks. No one exists. Like, I don't know. I'm an independent. I split my ticket, believe it or not. I vote for some Democrats. Crazy. The ones that I think are good, I vote for them. I don't care. But that's like, these people would never consider that. These people are incapable of ever considering to vote for a Republican because in their mind, they're fascists, they're Nazis, they're crazy. And that's, I mean, that's been the biggest thing for. Go ahead, sorry, CTV.
So lecture fan, question for you then, buddy, because I know you're going to have a brilliant answer, right? So, explain to me how we allowed through the Constitution the establishment of the parties as we know it today that got started in New Hampshire back in 1913, 1918, somewhere there with the first Republican Party, I believe.
No, Abraham Lincoln started
Wasn't
the
it?
Republican Party in the 1860s.
Well, with regard to it was the something changed, like the
Well, he was a leftist, just so you know, lecture fan.
wasn't it like the state voting laws changed to because there was something that happened. I remember going over it when I was looking into the Libertarian Party because they were talking about how they're the only other party that's on the ballot in all 50 states.
Are you talking about the direct election of senators, maybe? As opposed to the state legislatures? I don't know
what it is. There's something that, like, for example, this is. I wish I had it in front of me, right? But the idea that I was trying to get to is why is it that I can't vote in a Democrat primary if I'm not in the Democrat Party, and why do I have to be affiliated with the party in order to vote in that election? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, that varies by state. That's different state by state. Some states have open primaries and some states have closed primaries. So that's just a state by state issue. Now, I think it is an interesting question about, like, these are private parties. It's the Republican Party and it's the Democrat Party. These are private organizations, but they are like tied in with official like law in terms of the primaries and stuff like that. And so there is some, laws that I guess maybe you could say they prop up the two-party system, but in reality, I think the laws are just there to, deal with the reality that we have a two-party system. The reason we have a two-party system is because of our Constitution and the winner-take-all system where you can win the entire seat with 51% of the vote. And so if you have a system where you can win with 51% of the vote, you're going to naturally have, two parties each vying to get 51% of the vote, as opposed to, the parliamentary system where it's completely different.
Right. So then let me ask you this, because I feel like that I shouldn't have to be affiliated with any particular party to be able to vote in those primaries.
Okay, but why though? If you're not a member of the party, why should you get to tell a private organization? It's a private organization. They get to choose who they want to be the leaders of their organization. Why should you as a outsider to an organization get to have any say whatsoever in what an organization does if you're not a member of the organization?
Because that organization in and of itself is attempting to prop up who we the people would then be able to select as possible candidates for a position inside of government, which it applies applicably to everybody, right?
It's not like we wanted the party system to happen in America, so I kind of get where you're coming from. I would just say that, like, here's what ends up happening when you have a party infrastructure in a state. You have all of these local organizers who put in tons of work to do all of these different things to get all these different people elected. Oftentimes, they're working for people they actually don't like within the own party infrastructure. They're making sure people they don't like get elected, because ultimately working together works much better than independently. So you have these types of people who are political operatives. They're very involved in the process. And then you come in and you're like, yeah, I've never actually voted for a Republican. I've never even liked the Republican Party. I've always been like an independent, and I feel like I deserve a voice. when you can't even bother to be registered as a Republican. Meanwhile, those people are putting in all the effort. Their vote counts the same as yours.
Yeah, CTV.
See, I guess for me,
what I would say to your point, CTV, is what you're saying is really the reason why I think you should be a member of the party, because we live in a two-party system, and that's just the way it is. It's not going to change. It's just not going to change. That's how we have. And so what you just said in terms of, the parties get to control, who are going to be the candidates and who are most likely going to win. And so if you want to be an effective, policy advocate, if you actually want to make changes and you want to have an impact on our politics, you have to join a party and work within the party. And the reason that I join a party and am a member of a party is not because I agree with everything that's in the party or every person that's in the party. It's because I want to have a say over what it means to be a member of that party. So I'm not a Republican because I agree 100% with every Republican of all time. I'm a Republican because I want to be the one that gets to decide what it means to be a Republican and what's in the platform and everything else.
And think of it this way, CT. I don't think you're making, it's not cut and dry. I agree with some of the points you're making. There have been people in Pennsylvania that have said the same thing to me. They just get interested in politics and say, I'm interested in this particular candidate. Why can't I vote for them in the primary? Well, you're not registered. And they're upset about that. And I get that. Right. But think of what could happen if you didn't do that. Right. So let's say you were a shrewd member of the Republican or the Democratic Party. You could convince an awful lot of people. Look, it doesn't matter who wins our primary. They're just be our person anyways. But what we want to do is skew the opponent's primary in a way that we think it will benefit us to win the general election. So a bunch of you could then decide, instead of voting in the Republican primary, to vote in the Democratic primary and vote the person that you think would be the most radical or the least likely to win the general election, right? And so what happens is the Democratic Party be like, this isn't fair. There are people literally voting in our primary with the idea of sabotaging our organization, right? They're not even voting because they like these people. They're voting because they think they can harm. And I know this has happened the alternative way. In fact, Hillary Clinton's entire strategy was to get Donald Trump to win the primary because she thought, it'll be a walk in the park. Big mistake. Who would have thought by Hillary Clinton? But that's the type of stuff that can happen. So I agree with you. In theory, it should be we should all be able to vote a level of the election, but it is more complicated than that.
I guess when I sit back and I think about it, though, right? Let's assuming I'm running this organization, right? I'm obviously going to have some type of, we'll kind of use military terms, right? So we're going to have some type of spy network in place to try to find out the intelligence on the other side, right? If they're planning on making some type of devious move, as if, to get a bunch of independents to go this way, right? Or maybe we're going to send all of our Democrats over here to vote in the Republicans, right? Well, you put that information out there for everybody to know, and then you get more participation across all of the different blocks, and then maybe it kind of gets you more balanced out to which one is supposed to be the best voice anyway, because everybody's literally participating in everything.
Maybe,
and the problem is with that.
I don't know how I feel about it.
Because here's what could.
Why did that injury start echoing?
Yeah, Endernax, your audio just got really weird.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is
you unmuted yourself.
You unmuted on whereby.
I didn't mean to.
There you go. No, but think of what happens then, CTV. Then someone says, "Hey, Rob's running against CTV as a Republican for this primary," and CTV's like, "I have credible information that a bunch of independents and left wingers are voting in the Republican primary for Rob because he's really the Democrats' choice." I mean, it seems like an added step. I mean, it's something that I'd have to think about state to state. Don't get me wrong. I don't think there's no argument on that side, but I certainly understand why the Republican committee and the Democrat committee would say, we don't want outsiders that maybe don't have our committee and our party's best interest at heart being the deciding factor for who we nominate. There are other things like ranked choice voting or something that maybe would be a better option for.
And maybe
I don't know what I think about that.
Then maybe perhaps the best thing to do here would be to actually take the restriction off at the federal level. If you're running for federal office, right, then party affiliation shouldn't matter. right?
I don't think there's
Because-
any federal law that says party affiliation matters.
Well, you can't vote in the like all of us are sitting here looking at all the Democrat candidates and all the Republican candidates, right?
Oh, you're saying for like president, but that's
Yeah.
just because we let states ultimately decide. The parties went to a state system rather than saying, okay, we're just gonna have a federal primary.
Yeah, I think even
they
for
could do
federal offices, the states are still the ones that run the elections.
So
I will
It would
say,
be
I think
really
that we need some sort of reform to let third parties actually be viable.
Yep.
I would rather have it doesn't okay. This is the one thing that I really hate about the two-party system is that if you had a multi-party system in the United States, state legislatures would be the most insane crackpot of like feuding factions, but they would still get stuff done. You'd have like the libertarian faction in there. They'd be like, we want to end the war on drugs. We're chill with like abortion maybe or something. And then also, but we also want guns and we also like want less government. So they work with the Republican caucus, which would now probably be made up of like, you know, traditional conservatives and religious conservatives. And they'd be like, okay, we'll work with you for less government regulation and maintain our gun rights. And then they'd be like, oh yeah, by the way, Democrats, if Republicans ever try to take away abortion or they ever try to illegalize drugs, we're going to side with you on that bill. That would be how the dynamics would work. Except imagine now there's 8 parties. Like that's what it would be, the deal making process. You'd be independent of all these different institutions that ultimately peer pressure individuals into conforming to whatever the party platform is. You have less independent thoughts. You have less debate because ultimately the party boss is going to come down and say, listen, you're going to make us look weak if you don't get on board with this. And you're going to do this for us because if you don't, then we're going to screw you out of the donors that you usually get. We're going to make sure that you don't have access to party infrastructure. So if you build your own independent party infrastructure outside of that, you have a lot more options. And that's why I like that system. But how do you get there is the question. I thought every third party in the country should be working on getting ranked choice voting in their state, just their state, not federally. Because if you do that and you build up a party you can justify to a Republican, you can say, listen, you know, a libertarian leaning Republican, you can say, listen, you're not going to waste your vote. You're not going to waste your vote. You can put me as your first choice. And if I don't win, then your second vote is just for the Republican Party. So they end up getting your vote anyways. That way you can kind of start selling the third party idea. But nobody's doing that. So
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not going to change.
Yeah,
I don't think it's going to change. We live in a
Well,
two-party system, always have.
okay, so then let's just do the hypothetical, right? Because I like hypotheticals, right? So how would we go about? Because in the system that Endernax just described, I see there kind of being one central party, right, and then there being two, you know, each side off of that, and then the Democrat and Republicans and say Libertarian in the middle, right? The waters are going to churn in the Libertarian pool anyway, as far as where you're going to be able to get support. So then it ultimately would, in this case where we're at, rise the Libertarian Party up to the more central voice between a lot of the radical ideologies or whatever, right? So how do we get to something like that? Because it's either we get to something like that, or
It's
I
a
need to be
parliamentary
able to vote
system.
in both primaries.
The only way you'd have to go parliamentary.
I don't even know if you need that. I don't know if you need that because right now you have like libertarians are winning in the current system in some states for state legislature positions, is what I'll say. But if you have like ranked choice on a local voting system, I don't mean the federal election. I'm not talking about. Most people don't really realize that most of the things that are going to affect their life actually happen at their state legislature in the first place. They don't happen in Congress. But like if you introduce ranked choice voting, let's say in California, okay, you'd have Greens, you'd have a Socialist Party, you'd have the Democrats, you'd have Republicans, you'd have Libertarians, and you probably have like, I don't know, some new third party that's like a faith-based, like maybe a Catholic party or something. I don't know, because there's a lot of appeal in some Hispanic communities for this type of party. But you're not seeing that. And instead, you just have a Democratic-controlled legislature where everybody's forced to kowtow to whatever the extreme elements are the party. Or else you're going to lose access to the Democratic Party of California's resources.
Okay, so since this other idea of the two churning inside is not viable, right? Then how do we at least get to the point to where I don't know why everybody can vote in each one of the party's primaries when it comes to who's going to be president, right?
You can do that in
I
some
don't think
states. In some states, you can do that.
You can.
Depends on
I
the
think
state.
it's New Hampshire is one, right?
Yeah.
Am I crazy or is it New
Yeah, I
Hampshire?
mean, I don't know the ones you can't. I know Pennsylvania you can't. I know that.
Open.
I mean,
So this all comes down to each individual state then.
Yeah, each individual
Yes.
state gets to decide if it's an open primary or a closed primary.
Let's see. Right now, open primary states are Vermont, Virginia, South Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana. There's actually a lot, like a ton. There's way more than that.
right.
Montana's
it's-
one.
Yeah, Montana's open primary. Yeah, so
Is
so
North
what happens?
Carolina or Florida
What's
on that
crazy in
list?
Montana? And so in Montana, you actually, if you're an absentee voter in a primary election, you get 2 ballots in the mail. You get the
Wow.
Republican ballot, and then you get the Democrat ballot, and then you get to choose which one you want to vote, and then you throw out the other one.
Yeah.
There you go. Oh, wait. Interesting factoid about Montana. I was just
Should be
reading an
able to vote
article.
in both, though.
One of the youngest women ever elected to the state legislature in America was in Montana. Just happened this last election cycle. It was a 19-year-old girl who won in the Republican as a Republican. She
Yep.
beat a Democrat incumbent.
Yep.
I just think that you should be able to vote in both primaries because imagine like
What's the point of a
when-
primary then? Everybody's just going to vote. Everybody's going to vote in every race. That defeats the purpose of the primary.
I
Think
mean,
about
I
it,
guess I
right?
could see
If you-
it from like a perspective of somebody who is actually morally consistent. Like, let's say you had a
Maybe that's my
libertarian.
problem. That's
Right,
got to be
that
my
is your
problem.
problem. People would be assholes about it. Like, you would sit there and be like, you know what? I kind of like Tulsi Gabbard in the Democratic Party, even though my preferred candidate is Ron Paul in the Republican primary. So I'm going to vote for both these people. And then you'd have somebody from, I don't know, you'd have somebody sit there and be like, I'm going to vote for the guy who went up on stage and said the N-word in the past or something. I don't know what it would be to screw the other party over. That's what people would do. They'd start making bets on who their guy could defeat.
Why do people got to
The
be
clearest
assholes?
example of what would. But wait, here's what would happen. The clearest example. RobNoerr running as a Republican and a Democrat. Now what? You can vote for me in both parties. You know what I mean? And everyone would just run under both parties. Then. They would just say,
Can you
and then
do
your
that?
primaries would just be general elections. I don't see why you couldn't. But what would be to say you couldn't? You know,
Yeah.
and so then it would just the
The only
primary
thing
would
that
just be a
if the only thing that I'm trying to
general
affect is
election.
if the only thing that I'm trying to affect is just like people being able to vote in it, I don't think that would then necessarily mean that the entire structure of how those possible candidates got to where they are needs to be affected by that, right?
Well, everybody can vote.
mean,
You just have to register in certain states you have to register, but there's nothing preventing you from joining a party or registering as a party so you can vote in that party's primary.
Why don't we have maybe there's like a separate registration instead of with a party affiliation, just with like, I don't know, governmental participant, right? You just say, I'm participating or something like that. And then that allows you because I don't know. I mean, at least if you're trying, you know what I mean? Because some people may go register to vote and just not even put anything like no party affiliation or just independent, whatever. You know what I mean?
We're at a time
always
in history where more people are registered as independent than I think for a long, long time, which I think screams like, I think 67% of Americans said that they support a third party. And that's like, they want there's people in the Republican Party who want a Trump party, and there's people in the Democratic Party who want a socialist party. And I feel, I get the appeal. I just, like, how are you going to do that? It's not going to happen. Like, all of the entrenched powers are going to say, screw you. We don't want to give up our party power. Like, that's not going to happen.
The only way I see something like that happening is if there was a pretty good community. And you know what? I'm going to play fantasy Twitch gaming politics league here. You ready? Right? Let's just imagine the entire Twitch politics community and even the YouTube community got behind one particular person, right? And started putting out their message into their local communities, sharing that information. That's how you could get around. And then the people could obviously tune in and be able to see these people, right? And get an
Good
idea.
luck.
I'm just telling you, man. Like that's how you could do something like that at the grassroots level to be able to get out into society and avoid the whole party structure, right? Otherwise,
Well, I mean, you're right.
I don't even know where to start.
well,
Like, you would have to have people knocking on these people's doors, because that's the only real way. Like, if you know anything about political science, that's the actual way you convince people to vote for you or give you a chance. So you're going to have to develop your own, like, voter contact software. You're going to have to get access to all the voter rolls. You're going to need volunteers on the ground in each state. Like, it's just an insane. There's a reason third parties don't do very well.
Right.
I'm just telling you what would have to happen. It's an ideal world, but
okay, I gotta get going, guys.
CTV,
I gotta go. So, my girlfriend's getting.
Yeah, I have to leave in a minute,
too. Buddy.
I'll see you guys.
It was great talking to you. We'll talk soon.
Later, man.
Good talking to you guys. Bye.
So I will tell you this, CTV. I ran for Congress in 2019 as a Republican, and I tried to run in 2016 as a Libertarian, both in Pennsylvania. It is one, you're right in theory that the way that you, as an independent person, you can get your voice out there without party backing. The internet is a huge help of that. The idea of the Twitch community coming together for one person won't happen. I mean, but if right. That's the sort of stuff you would need to use the internet effectively, but there's so much more to it. So, for example, when I ran as a Libertarian, this is just something in Pennsylvania I ran into, right? I was refusing to take any donations, and I was working entirely by myself, with the exception of my wife was going to help me. Here's what happened right out of the gate. I was told by someone in the Libertarian Party that I had to start basically a nonprofit, like a corporate, not a corporation, but a group, where I had to name myself president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer, right? Then I had to fill out the paperwork for the donations that I was receiving bi-weekly or monthly. I can't remember. My response was, I'm refusing to accept any donations. They said that doesn't matter, because even if you don't, Republican and Democratic parties will try to keep you off the ballot, and they'll challenge you in court and say he didn't fill out the financial paperwork. So then I, who works 70 hours a week, who's doing this by myself, not only do I have to collect enough signatures, which is a big task by myself to get on the ballot, I have to spend my own money because I'm not accepting donations. And even though I'm not accepting the donations, I have to fill out this paperwork, which I don't even know where to begin to start every month, because I'm basically running as an independent. I mean, I was third party. I had the Libertarian Party behind me, but they could offer me no help. That's just the bare minimum to get your name possibly on a ballot. Then to be able to overcome the fact that, like, and I'm sure you would agree with this, LCTRfan, like, there are so many people that just are straight ticket voters, right? Like, there's just, like, I go to my local Republican meetings. They don't care if they know the name of the guy that's a Republican. If he's a Republican, they're over any Libertarian, any third party, any Democrat, and it's their right to do so. So how do you overcome that? And there's just these massive party infrastructures, even at your state and county levels, that it would be so hard. Even if I had ideas that I knew everyone in my county would love, right? It's going to be so hard to overcome that. Is there an R next to your name? Is there a D next to your name? So, I mean, it's not going to change. There are steps we could take to drive it in that direction. But, if you're out there and you're thinking, I'm more of a Trump person than a Mitch McConnell person, look, run for a primary yourself. Run for your school board. Run for local elections. These things, if you start, it's going to be a real big uphill battle. And I think you're going to put a lot of energy into something and not get a lot of results out of it. But I agree. I would like to see more parties too. It's just, it is what it is.
I feel like I would be best suited if I'm going to run for office. I feel like that the best thing would be federal office, because I would be one of those candidates. Because I'd be one of those candidates. Like, look, the federal government does not need to be involved with this in a lot of cases. You know what I mean? They'd be like, well, you don't know the particulars about this, or you don't understand, interplanetary fucking whatever. You know what I mean? It's like, well, that doesn't really matter. The federal government shouldn't be involved with it, right? So
I don't disagree.
So
people said, why didn't you run for state level? And you want to know what my God's honest answer was? Because I know more about the federal level. That's why. Like, I'm not going to run. Here's why you don't. If you're out there, please, everyone that's listening, you should run for office, particularly. But don't do it because you want a job. if that's your reason for running, just stop now, right? So people would ask me, why don't you run for state office? And I said, I don't know what I could add to that. I'm not going to run just because I might be able to win. That's a bad reason to run for office, because once you start doing that, then you basically, it's just about a paycheck. I'm not concerned about my constituents. So I would never run for an office that I didn't think that I had something to add for being in that office. So I felt I knew more about federal politics. That's why I ran for Congress. But maybe you know a lot about your local township. Maybe you'd be well suited for school board. Maybe you'd be well suited for some sort of state office. Those things matter. And like LCTRfan, I think, was saying, your local government has more impact over your life than the federal government. And so if you really changes, I mean, think of how good we could do if people like were on this panel were in charge of school boards. Think of how different it would be for our children that are, being, I think the education is horrible in this country. But oftentimes people just look at the big picture. Well, I just want to, the biggest thing's president. We're just worried about who wins presidency. And ask Pennsylvania how that's going. They didn't care about the off-year elections, so Democrats won them. Then they, through fiat, changed the way we vote, and Trump loses, right?
Have you ever thought about running
it's
for
important. These state and local.
LCTRfan, have you ever thought about running for office?
Well, yeah, since I was a kid. I've always said though that I would rather make a name for myself in the private sector versus be a career politician, which is why I'm focused on my career right now. I'd rather have a career and then run for office later down the road, as opposed to, be a career politician. So
well, hey,
someday I
guys,
probably
it's
will.
been great.
Like...
I do have to go.
All right, Rob.
I have to get up at 6 a.m. So I'm going to wrap up my stream once I get up. Thank you, guys. I can't wait to talk again. I thought it was a fun night. So
yeah, buddy. Appreciate you coming by.
Yep. We'll see you both. Take it
Later.
Easy.
See you, man. All right, everybody. That was Normal America with RobNoerr, right? Also known as the Bear, right?
All right, CTV. I'm exhausted too.
I hear you, man. It's getting about that time. But here's a question I got for you, right? I get the whole wanting to wait, but if the society itself is crumbling around us, right, which I think we can see happening, when you get to the point where maybe you thought you might, do you think there's going to be anything left?
Good question. Really good question. I don't know. I guess maybe not. I don't necessarily think that like the best thing I can do for the country is to run for office, though.
Well, I don't know.
I think so. It's possible.
I don't know,
though.
man. I just know that it doesn't seem like the real kind of level-headed conservatism is out there on display.
No, it's really not. It really is not.
So I don't know, man. I think about some of these bigger questions because my mind wanders from time to time, and then I end up in like a crazy place. And like, here's the question that I got for some hapless somebody that happens to fit the profile for the question. But yeah, like, what do we do, man? I mean, that's kind of where I'm at. I see how big the damn system is. It's one thing to have like prescriptions for policy, but with where everything's at, man, I just don't know what like a plan to right this ship that is clearly taking on water. You know what I mean?
I mean, I don't think there's anything you can do other than live your own life and handle your own life in the way that if everybody did it that way, we would be successful, which is why, look, you don't have control over what goes on at the federal political level. You have control over your own personal life. You have control over how you treat people. You have control over your family. You have control over things like that. You can get involved in local politics, and you can get involved in trying to change your friends' minds. You can get involved in, trying to change your neighbors' minds. You can get involved in lots of different things. I mean, streaming on Twitch, one of the reasons I stream on Twitch is because I think that's one way I could potentially help the country,
Outstanding answer. Outstanding answer.
Thank you.
Pack,
Thank
you heard it. Look, from LCTRfan, right? pretty much saying something that I've already said to these guys, and I wanted you to be able to say it, and I feel like maybe you said it a little bit better, right? So,
Which is what,
individual
streaming on Twitch? Oh,
responsibility.
individual responsibility. I thought you were talking about
Individ-
streaming on Twitch to save the country.
Maybe that's where we're headed, right? So I don't know.
Right.
But yeah, individual responsibility. You know, I tell them the random act of kindness that
Right.
you show to somebody may be the difference in their whole day. Like that stuff matters. That's
Oh, for sure.
that's the shit that really matters.
Right.
You know.
Absolutely.
So anyway,
right.
man, I'm gonna let you get to sleep. So
Yeah, good chatting. That was a good one.
yeah, man, I liked it a lot. So I appreciate you coming by, buddy.
Cool. Talk to you later.